get started, guys. So, who's excited to learn about the good and the bad of Victorian Egyptomania? The Victorians were definitely one of the real first waves of Egyptomania, which was mainly kind of siphoned through new communication methods at this time, like newspapers and then eventually photographs, telegrams, things like that. And although there are previous waves of Egyptomania, they're much smaller and they're limited because of access, essentially, to Egypt by whoever was doing the mania. The Napoleonic campaign to Egypt is what opened the country up, opened Egypt up, and the world up to more ancient and modern Egyptian culture. And this triggers this large wave of interest and fascination into ancient Egypt. I love learning about the Victorian age, but I find them very misunderstood by the general public. I find that a lot of like history quick facts, like just quick things of like weird history, which like tends to be trendy and like sensationalized and stuff, like anything that is considered weird will be attributed to the Victorians, even if it didn't actually happen during the Victorian age, or if it is like around the Victorian age. There's gonna be an ad in 3 minutes. I should have waited. But it's okay. I'll take a pause. I'll chug some water when I do that, because I'm feeling a little... Thank you, Alex. Yeah, I just let this one go, and we'll just pause for 3 minutes, and we'll go on. So the Victorian age is a huge period of industrialization, industry, discovery, and so a lot of them are just like, they're literally just trying new things. And maybe they're not doing that in the most conventional way possible. And then in regards to Egypt, this is also a period of colonization. Like, it's technically not like the earliest period of colonization, but like things are still happening when it comes to like, they are still colonial powers at play, and they are the people who are crazy about Egypt are the ones controlling Egypt at the same time. And so this is often that Westerners are more often prejudicial of these non-Western cultures and look down upon them. And this is reflected in the emerging academia of the time, which we'll talk about several different examples of. And then there is also the general public's view on Egyptians as well. Yes, Kepper, we're going to briefly mention the Napoleonic campaign, even though it is not considered the Victorian period. And I also want to define the Victorian era, because a lot of people, again, they're using things that are before or after the Victorian era and saying they're the Victorian era, and they're not. And I know that's a stupid semantic thing, but it annoys me. So we're going to keep going about it. And so again, I'm going to point out things that the Victorians didn't do. I'm also going to point out things that we don't have good primary sources that the Victorians did, unfortunately, because like a lot of this stuff is conjecture. And so I'm going to go into a lot of that at the beginning. And then we're going to talk about the difference between what is the general public doing and reflecting with ancient Egypt, and how are they interacting with it? And then how is academia and early Egyptologists interacting with it? And this is both in positive and negative ways that we're going to cover. The carrots, thank you so much for the follow. All right, this is perfect, because this is my next part is defining the Victorian age. So I'm going to let the 3 minute ad go. And then we will pick up with the Victorian age. I'll let you guys peruse these photos while the ad is going. And I'm gonna chug some water, and then I'm gonna also go fill up my water again, because I'm already empty. Well, thank you, Carrot. I'm so glad. I don't know which raid brought you here either. We had 5. I didn't have soda I just had Aperol and Prosecco. It's really not bubbly Prosecco, but it was Raven. Oh my god! I think I summoned it. But we have an ad. 6 raids. Holy shit. Hi, Ludo. I spoke it into an existence. Oh, you're playing Hades too! Hi, Ludo! I'm in an ad. I might be in an ad. Or it might not have started. Now it's started. Is that the Great Wall of China? Cool, Ludo. I am so glad everybody is here. I will wait to do my spiel after the ad, and then we will continue. Ages ago. Oh my goodness. It's so good to see you, Ludo. We are how many hours in? 10? Yeah, we're just at 10 hours. And I'm doing pretty good. I'm actually kind of surprised. Oh, why is Ubisoft wanting to open? Close that. Is that Age of Empire? What is that called? Oh, yours. I love when that happens. When your stream overlay, it's like like that's my first. Oh my god, that's so funny. It just picks a random clip, so it's. If you're still. There's a thing in Twitch. If you're still on at the turn of the hour, there's gonna be someone looking for a raid target. Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Oh gosh, Alex. I don't know what that means, but. I should have done an incentive for all the raids. I never expected to get so many. I'm gonna wait. We got 1.5 minutes. And then I will introduce myself to everybody. Also, I just noticed that her freaking... She's got a name tag that says Puss, which is fucking hysterical. It might even... I was looking for some crazy photos. At the 11th hour. Oh god. Oh god, who could it be? Who could it be? No more shots. No more shots. I'm only drinking this drink and that's it. Is that... I just picked random fucking weird... I just typed in weird, weird Victorian. But that... I don't doubt that. That makes sense, actually. Oh my god, there's a duel. I gotta watch. Oh! Oh! Her nickname was Puss. She's got like a taxiderm cat on her freaking forehead. It's fucking crazy. Miss! Oh gosh. Oh, oh, you're so close. Oh, Dom defeated Alex. The cat hat is very disturbing. All right, welcome on back. Thank you so much, Ludo, for the raid. Welcome on in, everybody. If you don't know me, my name is MelissainDeNile. I am in denial in more ways than one. I'm an Egyptologist, archaeologist, and I stream Egyptology and archaeology games. I've already had 4 shots of vodka. No, not vodka. I've had 2 shots of vodka, 1 shot of whiskey, and 1 shot of gin, and an Aperol Spritz, because we are in our 12-hour anniversary stream. We only have 2 more hours left to go, and so we have a lecture. And we are talking about Victorians and their fascination with ancient Egypt. We just got started. We're literally in the second slide, talking about defining the Victorian age. But welcome on in. Thank you guys so much for raiding in. You are a 6th raid of the day, and I'm just so grateful for everybody who popped in. And apparently we might have a 7th in an hour. which is foreboding. But yes. So, defining the Victorian age, I think, is quite important because, so many people claim the Victorians do a lot of things, but when you actually look at the dates of the Victorian age, there's a lot of things that people claim the Victorians did that did not happen during the Victorian era. And again, I know it's semantics, but I like to be specific when it comes to history, and I don't like to blame the Victorians for everything when they aren't the only weird people in history. So, the technical dates of the Victorian period are as follows: June 20th, 1837 to January 22nd, 1901. This is the beginning and end of Queen Victoria's reign. The Georgian era is before her, and the Edwardian era is after her death. This period also includes things like the Gilded Age in America. Like, it includes other period names. The Victorian age is pretty much the British name, but there's other things too, obviously. Like, the Gilded Age is what's going on in America at some point. What's it called? I just had it at the top of my tongue. The French age is called the Baroque something. No, not Baroque. I just had it on the tip of my tongue and now I lost it. But yeah, there's other, Belle Epoque. I actually had it in my notes. I should have just listened. I should have just read my thing. The second half of her reign is called the Belle Epoque. Epoch, I can't really say it. Period, and that's kind of what it is in mainland Europe. So, like, there are other periods inside of the Victorian period, but when people say the Victorian period or the Victorian age, they should only mean between these two dates. So there is a historian named Michael Sauder, and he actually picks out 3 distinct periods within the Victorian age that I think are important to kind of point out to kind of understand what is going on. Mostly, yes, in England, but also in kind of mainland Europe. So there is the early Victorian period from 1837 to 1850. This is a time that was actually pretty socially and politically unsettled at that time. And then you have the Victorian heyday. It's sort of like the early Victorian period is people getting used to Victoria after a long time. And again, industry is really booming, and kind of a lot of change is going on. The Victorian heyday is from 1851 to 1879. This is a time of prosperity, as well as domestic prudery, and then complacency, as well as he's defined it. And then the late Victorian period is 1880 to 1901. And there's new waves of aestheticism, imperialism, lots of new things coming out in this last time period. This is an age where things are changing like crazy. There is so much new technology, and it's evolving pretty constantly. And that is industry itself, as well as medicine and sciences, and then like socially as well. Like, we're getting towards women working more, and we are coming up to World War I. Like things are changing a lot in this time. It's very much an industrial revolution. This is a time period where the sciences are becoming more professional and like possible for a job, and people are getting more access to education. More men, yes, but like people are getting access to more things as time goes on. And so it's very much an age of experimentation. And as I've already mentioned, I find it's very, anytime anyone talks about anything weird in history, they really want those fast, fun, weird facts. They're gonna point to the Victorians. And they're generally known for their weirdness. And this is definitely not in the academic space, but in the more pop culture, in the public eye. And I think that the weirdness that people attribute to them is not actually weird at all. Again, it's this age of experimentation. They are trying everything, and they're also recording everything that they are trying. Like, it doesn't mean that they're trying things like in the best way that they possibly can, in the most morally or ethical way, because you also have to point that out. But I tend to try to give it a little bit more nuance in that they're really just trying to figure stuff out. And because of newspapers and because of letters that have been preserved, a lot of the stuff is recorded rather than the experimentation of the medieval age, where not a lot of stuff is getting written down and recorded because people are less literate. And then you have eventually photography, and that really changes the game as well for taking pictures of weird things like these exercise machines. And so this goes so far beyond Egyptomania that we're going to talk about now. As you guys know, I work in a museum that talks about medicine in and around this time period, and I feel like the medical and the science world is where a lot of this experimentation is coming out and comes across as weird. But you have to remember that there was such a limited access to science before this time period, and it was barely understood. They were called philosophers. Like science, there was no such thing as a scientist. It was philosophers, and that covered every type of science, chemistry, physics, all of those things. They were philosophers, and that's not the same as a philosopher is now. Like all of the philosophers of Greece, while yes, they definitely did a lot of philosophical things, they also did a lot of science things as well, but they were still called philosophers, not scientists. And as I mentioned, there's this increase in media, though not everyone is able to read in this sense. In this time period, the number of literate people is increasing. Children are getting more education at a younger age. And then we have newspapers and photographs and public forums where the middle class has more access to these things. Even if they can't go to Egypt, they are going to start learning about Egypt much quicker than anybody before them would ever have learned. So let's take a look at the Egyptomania in the Victorian age, and then we're going to go over it generally first, and then we're going to cover what happened specifically in the Victorian, that the Victorians specifically did and didn't do. So the first real wave of Egyptomania comes from the Napoleonic campaign in 1799, which obviously is prior to the Victorian age, but I want to give you guys this background. This opens Egypt up. Oh my god. Hi, Pyro Kitty's Tavern. Welcome on in. It's a tavern raid. Welcome on in, guys. You guys are raid 7 of the night, and I am counting because this is the most impressive stream we've had in 5 years. We are celebrating our 5-year anniversary. Hi, Mary Berry. Thank you for redeeming a giveaway ticket. And thank you, Christmas Cat, for the follow. I will say we are not going to do another giveaway unless we get... We're only doing giveaways every 5 subs that we get, and we have 61 right now. So, with 4 more subs, we will do another giveaway. I ran out of books. But I have I have other things that I can give away. If we do get 4 more subs to trigger another giveaway. But Mary, your name is being added to the giveaway. Oh, you're celebrating your first affiliate anniversary. Congratulations! Isn't Stray the one where you're a little cat and you're a stray cat and you're running through stuff? How cute! I love that. So thank you so much for coming in, and congratulations on your first affiliate anniversary. So my name is MelissainDeNile. I am in denial in more ways than one. I am an Egyptologist, archaeologist, and I stream Egyptology, archaeology video games here on Twitch, as well as do discussions and lectures. We are celebrating our 5-year anniversary today. It is not our stream anniversary. It's not our affiliate anniversary. It is the anniversary of Melissa posting our first blog post and Instagram post, which is what MelissainDeNile as a brand started as. And then we didn't start doing Twitch until November. So we will also celebrate, we will celebrate 5 years in November, have another 12-hour stream where we'll play video games all day. But today we've been doing discussions. We did discovery tours. I made a perfume cone headdress custom craft. And now I am giving a lecture about Victorian Egyptomania and all of the weird things they may have did or didn't do. So welcome on in, everyone. I'm so glad you guys are here. Raid number 7. Oh my goodness. Absolutely amazing. I was gonna say that maybe that's the one that Alex was talking about, but that might be a different one. So maybe we will have 8 raids today. I also have had multiple shots throughout the day, and I've smashed 2 cakes in my face. They did. And we're going to talk about things that they didn't actually do but are attributed to them. But we're getting just into the very basics of like Egyptomania and the Victorian age. How did it get to this point? Brandiversary! Thank you so much. Santrora Arts, thank you so, so much. I'm just so glad y'all are here. This has just made my day. Made my month. Made my year. My crown keeps shifting. I am dressed as the goddess Newt. I don't have my fancy makeup on, but I am dressed as the goddess Newt. You actually can't see on the other side. Here, I'll wear this side for a sec so you guys can see this. 15 minutes either side of the hour is the danger zone. Okay. I don't know what Alex is talking about, but I'm just gonna go with the flow. I know, I think we should call this a brandiversary. I think we will, because I always describe it as my brand because I don't want to say company because I'm not incorporated yet. So I've always said brand. So this will be brandiversary. Oh, being mass rated. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I'm gonna burp. I've had too much shots. So, as I mentioned, the first like huge wave of Egyptomania in like general is the Napoleonic campaign of 1799. This is not during the Victorian period, but this leads up to it very easily. Thank you for the lurk. So this opens up Egypt to the Western world, as well as opens France and UK specifically to both like colonize the area and then essentially reap the benefits of occupying the country. And one of the main reasons that Egypt was embraced so easily was that it was intrinsically so alluring to Westerners. This is coming off of the culture of Romanticism, which embraced a lot of different exotic locales. And the ancient Egyptian life was seen as very eternal in many, many aspects. Obviously, they believed in the afterlife, and that is always, always enduring. But there was something about their monuments still standing that made Westerners see that they were living forever, that there is this eternal life that is still existing in Egypt always. So the other thing is that the beginnings of the actual field of Egyptology begin with the Napoleonic campaign. While most military campaigns prior to this, and honestly even after this, would just be sort of focused on conquering and looting, technically, these sites, Napoleon brought these things called savants to them. If you want to learn more about the savants, I do have a guest lecture with, is it Caroline? I can't remember her name. I think it's Caroline. I have a guest lecture on my YouTube page that is, she is a French historian, and she gave an amazing, amazing guest lecture about Napoleon's savants and some of the really specific things about them. It's really great. It's over on my YouTube page. You can watch. But essentially, these are men from different fields of sciences and arts that went to record the country of Egypt and what they saw. They definitely looted stuff and took stuff with them, but they did also take the steps to record sites, to paint sites, to map sites, which no other military campaign really cared to do. And this, the result of this was the description of Egypt, one of the first huge Egyptology books, and it gave so much more access to Egypt to the West. If you couldn't get to Egypt, maybe you could get a copy of the description of Egypt, or you could see it somewhere. And this includes all of these like armchair archaeologists, armchair Egyptologists who never went to Egypt. And the last thing I'll point out that happened prior to the Victorian era is very important to understand is the decipherment of hieroglyphs. It took many years to decipher hieroglyphs. With the discovery of the Rosetta Stone closer to 1799, Jean-Francois Champollion fully was able to translate the very beginnings of the hieroglyphs in 1824. So about 9 years. In 1824. So about 20 years after they were discovered, but 9 years before the Victorian era began. And this is the next big step that the field of Egyptology needed. If it did not occur at this time, I honestly think the field of Egyptology would be very, very different. And I got really deep into thinking about this because there is quite a difference with how Egyptology is studied before 1824 and after, based on people learning hieroglyphs and then linguists continuing to learn more about the language and translating the language. And if the decipherment of hieroglyphs, let's say, happened in the late 1800s or maybe even the early 1900s, I feel like in some ways it would be better, because the sciences were becoming more professional by the late Victorian era, and the sciences were being sort of established in that time period, and they were much more strict at that time rather than in the beginning of the 1800s. I then think you could also have like the introduction of photography, which would really help linguists who couldn't go to Egypt, so they could translate texts and learn about more stuff. But I also think on the other side of it, there would be so many years of Egyptologists essentially making shit up. So I feel like, unfortunately, we would be very behind in understanding the Book of the Dead, the afterlife, texts on temples that tell us about like specific events like the Battle of Kadesh, like all of those things, because unfortunately we have records of how Egyptologists faked their way through it. If you guys remember the catacomb of metempsychosis, which I've talked to you guys about, which is one of the temples or one of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, but before they could read hieroglyphs, so they didn't know whose tomb it was. So they looked at this piece and they interpreted it based on their Christian religion, and they essentially determined that they thought that ancient Egyptians believed in reincarnation. Hi, Casey Snowheart. Welcome on in. My crown keeps slipping because it's not on my head perfectly. And so I think we would unfortunately be very behind, and there would be so much prior misinformation that I would be worried if we would be able to actually cycle all of that out. Nowadays, we pretty much can accept anything from prior to 1824 is probably going to be shitty. And even within the next 20 to 30 years after 1824, any translations are also going to be shitty. But I feel like we might have had the chance that some things would have been better if the decipherment happened later in time. I do agree with you, Hot Cherry, that the sciences do get pushed forward because of that decipherment, for sure. So I think that's another thing that, like, what would Egyptology, I think, might be behind at that time. That's actually probably true. Yeah, it probably had a lot of like a domino effect on other things as well. I don't doubt that's true as well. So this is just like a weird thought I've had of like what would have happened if we had translated it later. But as I said, like, Victorian period doesn't start until 1837, so let's skip 40 years in the head of time, and let's see how Egyptomania was during that time period. So, Egyptomania, the word, is actually a relatively old word, and it was coined in a letter talking about the mania about visiting Egypt. And the study of Egypt at this time is actually more called Orientalism, and it's now a very outdated term. It's honestly very prejudicial against all the groups that it would fall under what is considered the Orient. Anything outside of the Western world almost, but the Near East and Egypt were kind of the largest focus of what they considered the Orient, which is so funny because when I ever heard that word when I was younger, I always thought that meant Asian countries. Like, the Orient was Asian countries, and to be honest, not even like India, like Asian, like all the way east, all the way Eastern Asian countries. Yeah, Darius. Might have helped a little bit. Absolutely. So in general, the Egyptomania in the Victorian age was really really only a middle to upper class phenomenon. And definitely with a high emphasis on the upper class. The mania does have a quite wide range, because the upper class are the people who are going to Egypt. They are traveling to Egypt. They are obtaining artifacts, while the middle class people are obtaining Egyptomania style jewelry, or going to exhibits or visiting museums, but not traveling to Egypt. In some cases, they might be obtaining artifacts like through a secondary path, but most of the time they are just kind of consuming it. They're consuming whatever Egyptomania is only being given to them in their country, if that makes sense. Yeah, exactly. I also, like, that's what I thought. I thought it was all East Asia, but I was wrong. I never would have called, like, Egypt the Orient. Was not the way I thought about it was. And so obviously there are so many more other important social causes that are like going through this time period. You got child labor, women's rights, slavery, that although these are a big phenomenon in certain circles, Egyptomania was not the biggest thing that people should have been concerned about in this time period. And I will say, in comparison, this wave of Egyptomania was probably half as crazy as the Egyptomania after King Tutankhamun, which is obviously very shortly after. It's only about 20 years after the end of the Victorian era. But it's, just like takes off way more and is very steady for a quite a long while after this. This is like very selective sort of Egyptomania, if that makes sense. In some cases they did, yes. There really wasn't a lot of Egyptomania prior to the Napoleonic campaign. Like, you're right, they knew about it from the Bible. I don't really think they thought of it as super negative, though. That's a very good question. For the most part, we assume people didn't really know much about it because it was very closed off from the rest of the world. So people couldn't learn a lot about it. Very, very small group of people were actually going there. So you're right. I guess they would only be hearing it from the Bible if they were Christian or Jewish. But I don't even think they're like, I wouldn't call it, I don't think, a negative perception because it wasn't that bad. They still talked about it a lot. That's a very good thought. I've never thought about that before. I've never thought about an anti-Egyptomania before. I'm gonna have to think about that. So, first we are going to talk about things that the Victorians did not actually do, but is blamed. They get the blame. This also applies to things that we don't have a lot of evidence that they actually did it. So the first one we're going to talk about... Oh, sorry. I forgot that I was going to pick that slide. So there are some things that are unconfirmed, and we'll go over the evidence that we do have and see kind of like what we think. And then there's also things that like they just straight up didn't do. So the first one's a little bit obvious. It's Mummia. We're going to talk about Mummia again. Is this like the third time? I feel like I've talked about this like 3 or 4 times already in a lecture. I'm gonna make it brief because we've talked about this a lot already and you guys can ask any questions, but obviously there's a really long section when we did it. I talked about when we did the debunking of myths lecture, which is on my YouTube, so you can go watch that again if you want more. I do also have 5 or 6 TikToks about this that is all in a debunking playlist on my TikTok, so if you want to learn more about that, go over there. They might all be in my YouTube, I can't remember. But I'm going to summarize it very quickly. Mummia is a substance that was thought to be a medicinal cure for quite a lot of ailments that was supposedly made out of ground up mummies. Like you can see PULV, pulverized mummy, or P meaning powdered mummies. Powdered or pulverized are 2 options for what the P stands for. It is now understood that the actual medicine that people wanted and thought was doing a lot of the cure is something called bitumen, which is natural asphalt or pitch. And essentially it was originally discovered by Arab physicians and was used that way. And through a long, very convoluted series of translations, after it got to Europe because of the Crusaders, it got completely convoluted into mummia meant mummy. It's also where the name mummy comes from, I think, technically. And essentially, they thought that mummia was not the natural pitch that was coming out of it, but was actually the black resinous material that was poured over mummies during like the New Kingdom to late Intermediate period. And so they translated it as, oh, it's the exudate. It's the thing that exudes out of an ancient Egyptian mummy. And that is that liquid that is dried and powdered. So when the Crusaders brought it back to Europe, this is, again, Middle Ages, Crusaders. Remember, what is that, 1500s? 1500s Crusaders? 1600s? Somewhere around there. The interest grew like wildfire. People wanted to know more about it. People wanted to get it. And there was a lot of translation errors, so that they thought that it was actually ground up ancient Egyptian mummies. Oh, even earlier. Thank you, Baha. I was like, I don't know when the Crusaders are. So yeah, even earlier. That makes more sense. So the 1300s. So Crusaders around that time. So really, really early. And they then had to grind down Egyptian mummies. And so somebody was exporting Egyptian mummies to Europe and they were getting ground down. But essentially the misinformation that you keep hearing on social media is the Victorians ate ancient Egyptian mummies. You just hear that. The Victorians ate ancient Egyptian mummies, which is untrue. Because again, we're not talking about the Victorian age. We're talking about 11 to 1300s and on. Yeah, 11th to 13th centuries. God, this crown is never gonna stay on. "100 years off. You got it, Baha." So we know that Egypt actually banned the exportation of mummia from Egypt in the 16th century because of how much Europe wanted it and all the Europeans wanted it. Hello, Ed. Hello, Alex. What the fuck? Hello. No! They're playing Taskmaster! What happened? I don't want that. I want my... I mean, I love Taskmaster, but why is it playing Taskmaster? It was so weird. I was like, hello? What? I was gonna say that thing is 11 hours, so maybe it ran out. Maybe it ran out of time. It just went to the next video. Okay. Where was I? I'm fading. I'm fading fast. I can feel it all now. Hitting my body. Damn you, autoplay. So, the key thing is after the banning of exportation of mummia, we aren't 100% clear if any of the customers knew that they were supposed to be eating Egyptian mummies, or if they were eating Egyptian mummies, or if they just wanted mummia. Like, we have no idea if people knew this, sort of. And then we don't know if they told them when they changed it, because after they had to get rid of ancient Egyptian made mummia, you had, they would grind up modern dried corpses and ground them up and use them. So how do you know if you're getting an ancient Egyptian mummy or you're getting a modern mummy? Who the hell knows? It has been determined that mostly by the 18th century, mummia is almost completely out of use. There is some evidence in a pharmaceutical company price list that mummia is listed in as late as 1924, but again, is it Egyptian mummia? Is it normal mummia? Is it bitumen? We don't fucking know. So most likely by 1924, they're not using ancient Egyptian mummies. And very surprisingly, I've had people on TikTok like want to fight me on this, that Victorians did it and they absolutely were eating this mumia in the Victorian age. Yes, I will admit that there are some products with this name sold by that time period, but the vast majority of them are probably not Egyptian mummies. The other thing I've fought with people about in the comments is people who combine this myth with the myth of mummy unwrapping parties, which we are going to talk about, but essentially saying that during the unwrapping parties, they were eating the flesh, which is so completely and utterly untrue. And we have no evidence that they did that. Absolutely no evidence. Yeah. So, like, we're gonna talk about, like, the ethical versus unethical types of mummy unwrapping parties, but some of them, at the least, were at least supposed to be in the name of science, and would not be that bad. So, I've had people fight me in the comments on this, and I'm like, show me the evidence you have, and nobody would show me anything, so. So yeah. That's mumia. I really would love... I feel like it's still unethical for me to own it, but I really would love a jar that has mumia written on it. I would really, really like it. I think I saw a replica of one on Etsy, and I think I would probably buy that, because I still think it's unethical for me to own something like that, but I think I want to buy a replica, because it's very cool. Ooh, Shasta, it does not get a debunking, but it is included in this lecture, so just wait. We will be talking about Mummy Brown. Beefully, it's, the thought of mumia is that it did apparently, they thought it cured a lot of things. The Arab physicians really did use this for real things. I am blanking on what those real things are, but I think they used it in salves, and then you would also ingest it for maybe ulcers, maybe? But, like, the Arabs really did think that this would help. I don't know if it does anything. It seems crazy to eat. I don't know. I'm sure it has a lot of iron in it. I don't know. It's natural it's bitumen. It's asphalt. Like, I feel like it has to have some sort of iron or something. But yeah, it essentially only gets associated with Egyptian mummies because of translation errors, because of how similar the words are in Arabic and in other early European languages. So, the next one we're going to talk about is a freaking brand new thing for me, which I have never heard of before in my life, and it is the most interesting. I was deep diving on this when I really should not have. And it is something called mummy paper. So, this is essentially a paper, and this is again, we're in the section of claims. So I will give you the evidence that we have, and we will see. You guys will form an opinions of what you think, of if you think this is real, based on the evidence I give you guys. So this is apparently actual paper, like modern paper, that was made from linen wrappings as well as some other fibers like papyrus from ancient Egyptian mummies. And very interestingly, this seems to be only specifically imported to the Americas in the 1850s. There's very little claims of it anywhere else. So the existence of this paper has not been conclusively confirmed, and that's why, again, I'm putting it in this category. The story begins that in the 1850s, paper making in America was actually reaching a crisis point. It was producing more newspapers than any other country, and its paper consumption was equal to both England's and France's combined. And this makes a lot of sense, because it did boggle my mind when I would see how many cities would have multiple newspapers, and multiple newspapers that would publish a newspaper every single day back in the 1850s and 60s, rather than doing like a Sunday paper. They were producing a shit ton of papers every single day, multiple page papers, like 4 to 5 page papers. So, according to an 1856 estimate, it would take 6,000 wagons, each carrying 2 tons of paper, to carry all of the paper consumed by American newspapers every single year. There were about 800 paper mills working at the time in the United States. I also did not know this, is that until the method of separating cellulose was discovered to help make paper, it was actually manufactured, which is from what this lady is holding here, from discarded clothing, sailcloth, ropes, and other fibrous products that were more often than not called rags. So yeah, I did not know this. This was again, I was going way deep into this because I was so fascinated. So rags, Rag and Bone Man. So Rag and Bone Man is one of my favorite singers, but a Rag and Bone Man was a man who would go around collecting rags for the paper. Oh, sorry, wrong scrolling. So most of the rags in the 1850s and 1860s were actually imported from Europe, the largest source being from Italy. But in 1854, Italy also started exporting rags to England. Yeah, I think they might have. I am not familiar with that term, but I would not doubt it, that because rags, like, I was so confused when I was reading and I was like, wait a second, what are they talking about? Rags? And I was like, oh my God, they're talking about like physical rags, which is crazy. So in 1854, Italy starts exporting rags to England, which decreases the amount available for America. And remember, America's making as much as England and France combined. So they're running out of rags, people. And so the story of mummy paper continues with a man called Dr. Isaiah Deck, who was a geologist by trade and an archaeologist by hobby, of course. He goes to Egypt in 1847 to apparently search for the lost emerald mines of Cleopatra. I didn't know there were any lost emerald mines of Cleopatra. But he essentially, he can't find it, obviously. And he notices the plethora, exactly, Hot Cherry. He notices the plethora of mummies and mummy parts and animal mummies. And he notices all the linen. And he states, quote, "It is by no means rare to find above 30 pounds weight of linen wrapping on mummies. A princess from the late Mr. Pettigrew's collection was swathed in 40 thicknesses, producing 42 yards of the finest texture." So, apparently Mr. Deck makes several proposals to American paper mills to use ancient Egyptian linens in their papermaking. What is unclear is that we do not know if any paper mill actually took up his proposal, if they took it seriously. Most of what appears to be is hearsay of people related to those people working in the paper mill industry and talking about this subject. For example, there is a letter from a Mrs. John Ramsey who is relating a story from her father's friend that he used to tell her from his days at the paper mill in New York. She wrote that, quote, "The rolled up vestments retained the shape of the mummy, so that when the workman tried to straighten or unroll the cocoon, it sprang back at once into the shape of a mummy it had encased in so long." Which is also not real, not true. It's very weird. And most of this information comes from a book called Papermaking, The History and Technique of Ancient Craft by Dard Hunter, who's a well-known paper researcher and cataloger. So there is some evidence of this in newspapers, but I'm going to be honest, newspapers are not really to be trusted at this time period, and I will show you some of the stuff. So a prolific printer, Joel Munsell, created a book called The Chronology of the Origin and Progress of Paper and Papermaking, which includes scrapbooks of articles that related to his trade. One such article records that in 1855, a cargo of 1,215 bales of Egyptian rags arrived and were purchased for about 4 cents a pound, adding up to about $25,000. Key here, it just says Egyptian rags. Here's the key. Listen. And another article from the New York Tribune wrote about 2 1/4 million pounds of rags have been imported from Egypt. Again, it just says rags. Nowhere does it say ancient Egyptian mummy linen. And these could potentially essentially be the rags that they were importing from Italy, but they're just coming from Egypt now. So there are also articles discussing the practicality and the financial implications of the imports of mummies for paper in the government of Egypt and American paper mills from 1847, but none of these articles confirm the manufacture of said paper in America. At the least, they do prove that the concept was both widely spoken of and under discussion in a well-known and respected periodicals of the day. There's another newspaper from Syracuse, New York in 1856, which ran a notice that its paper was printed on a paper made from rags imported directly from Egypt. One of the scholars who talked about this does remark that it might just mean that it's being on rags from Egypt and not from ancient Egyptian mummies. And a copy of the paper has been located. It was lost for a while and unclear if anyone had seen it. It has been found at a historical association. And I will say the scholar has confirmed that the wording of the notice does imply that it's linen from mummies. And there is a physical description of the issue than others before it. And then this one is a pamphlet that talks about Steam Book and Job printers, and you can see here the material of which it is made was brought from Egypt. It was taken from the ancient tombs where it had been used in embalming mummies. And yeah, so this does claim that it was used from Egyptian linens. So many scholars do argue that this mummy paper does not actually exist because the references are vaguely documented or the product of oral history, thus might be correct. There are a lot of writers who talk about this, that it might be actually satire when they're kind of referring to this. And unfortunately, the pieces that do claim to be made out of mummy paper can actually not be chemically tested or carbon-14 dated because the entire paper would have to be burned. And that's unfortunately not a risk that a historian is going to take when the entire paper has to be burned. And the other thing is that the percentage of mummy cloth to any other rag in this full pulp mixture could skew the rest of the test. So it's something that unfortunately we probably are not going to be able to confirm, but it is a very interesting thing to think about. The next one. Mummies used as railroad fuel. And I feel like some of you guys may have heard this one too. This one's a rarer one. But yeah, I think it's very close. I think the other thing is it could be the modern Egyptians are making linen and they're saying this is the stuff that they used to wrap mummies in, and they are referencing specifically the modern linen and not the ancient linen. So if you hear it is fuel, it is technically only railroad fuel. I have not heard any other specific one that is not fueling railroads. And is only fueling railroads in Egypt, not anywhere else. This is probably what you have heard of, but it's just been condensed down. But this is a very interesting reference, and I think you guys are going to enjoy this because it is very weird. So this is another unconfirmed practice that supposedly the Victorians did, is the burning of mummies to fuel the railroad, to fuel the trains in Egypt specifically, not in Europe, but in Egypt. The most famous example, technically one of the only examples, is coming from a novel by Mark Twain, which you can see up here in the corner. I was really happy to find this cartoon. It is a novel called Innocents Abroad. It was published in the 1860s, and this is the quote. I shall not speak of the railway, for it is like any other railway. I shall only say that the fuel they use for the locomotive is composed of mummies 3,000 years old, purchased by the ton or by the graveyard for that purpose, and that sometimes one hears the profane engineer call out pestily, damn these plebeians, they don't burn worth a cent, pass out a king. Yes, Roxy. But then, after that quote, the master storyteller speaks in tongue of cheek, and he lets the reader in on the joke in the next passage, which reads, quote, stated to me by fact, I only tell it as I got it. I am willing to believe it. I can believe anything. Exactly. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But this is a fictional novel. It's a satirical, like, of people abroad, like going and visiting other countries. But yeah, it essentially this story is then it is mentioned in a couple more reliable secondary stories, especially because the novel was published in the 1860s, so these are slightly before it, and one is after it. So it is included in an article in Scientific American in 1859, as well as in a paper that was published in the BBC News in 2011, and we'll talk about the 2011 one. But it really doesn't appear that there's any sort of expert that has been able to authenticate the story, and Twain seems to be the only one who's really published it. There is another claim from 2006, which should really tell you that this is probably hearsay. Ironically, this combines the last misinformation with this one. It comes from a retired former paper manager at a paper mill. He went to Egypt where he asked tour guides about mummy paper. And the tour guides told him this combination of these myths that we just talked about. They said that when the rail line was being laid from Cairo to Alexandria, the engineers kept uncovering vast repositories of mummies. And the smaller ones were used to burn as fuel in locomotives, and the larger ones were sent to be stripped of their cloth to be used in paper companies. And honestly, the only thing that is evidence of this is that all of these myths are very pervasive, and they appear in both the Western world and then obviously are repeated in Egypt as well, even though there is really not any evidence that it was actually happening. Yes, tour guides are super reliable storytellers. So yeah, not a lot of evidence of this one. Like, really, I think even though that there's one reference to it in 1859, Mark Twain may have written his book, like, even though it was published in 1860, he may have written it before. Like, I think they can't not be related because it's only coming out a year in between. So, who knows? Who knows? This one's a hard one. All right, we still got more. Still have more. Mummies as fertilizer. A lot of these are about mummies, if you couldn't tell. Is this the last one I'm going to talk about in this fake section? Yes. Okay. So the last one that we'll talk about in this, like, fake unconfirmed is the mummies as fertilizer, which I've been wanting to talk about for a while because I found this article that it grabbed all of the newspaper articles that ever referenced this. And so I've put a couple up here. So this one is sort of the most probable out of all of these because there are a lot of news articles, but it might be more exaggerations than the truth. So it's essentially that ancient Egyptian mummies, either animal or human, are being used to make fertilizer. Mostly this is actually animal mummies, not human mummies. Like cat mummies, essentially. So it appears that this myth comes from another myth that I had not heard of before, which I didn't have time to talk about because it's kind of, we don't have as much, which is called mummy wheat, which is supposedly bread made from crops grown with mummy flour, which was made from ground mummies, or was bread grown from wheat that was fertilized with ground mummies. Both of which are crazy, are absolutely crazy to think about. But I digress. It essentially appears that this concept of mummies used as fertilizer really only comes from one source at the beginning. Essentially, in one case around 1888, an Egyptian farmer, sometimes said to be from Beni Hassan, uncovered the remains of a sacred animal necropolis with lots and lots of mummified cats. He found about 180,000 of these, and he sold them to an Alexandrian merchant for about £3, 13 shillings per ton. And there was about 19 to 20 tons of these mummies. These were then all shipped to England on 2 different cargo ships and were auctioned in Liverpool in 1890, so 2 years later. And again, I found this great document where they had all of these newspaper articles from England that they collected about the subject. The earliest published article is the one that is the closest over here to me on the left. And it is published on February 1st, 1890. And then the vast majority of the other articles on this list are published within 11 days of the first publication. And if you don't know anything about early newspapers at this time, many newspapers would directly copy articles from other newspapers at the time, and often would, sometimes they would label it and say what newspaper article it was coming, like newspaper it was coming from. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes they are paraphrasing the article. They're not really doing the full article. And sometimes they're just completely rewriting it when you can tell it's almost a direct copy of what was said in another newspaper. And because you're not traveling a lot, you're not reading a lot of different types of newspapers, you're only going to read your local one, so you're not going to notice that any of this happened. Hi, Osage Orange! Thank you so much for the 5-year stream anniversary. Thanks so much. Well, it's not my stream anniversary, it's my brand anniversary. But yes, thank you so much. We are hour 11. We just hit hour 11. We have 1 more hour. And we're doing a lecture about Victorian Egyptomania. We actually might go slightly over an hour, but I think yeah, it's confusing. MelissainDeNile started 5 years ago today. We didn't start streaming until November, so we're going to do a second 12-hour stream in November, all about games. This is all about education. So we're talking about the concept of mummies, ancient Egyptian mummies being used as fertilizer, and how that is most likely not a true thing, or is a very exaggerated Victorian weird event that happened. All right, I love this crown. I cannot wear it. It's just sliding back and forth, and it's annoying the crap out of me. Okay. Oh, I forgot I turned my fan off when the candles. I was like, why am I hot? Oh God. We had a 12-hour stream last year. We usually only do a 12-hour stream for our stream anniversary, but we decided to do 2 this year. So 1 today and 1 in November. I think it's November 22nd. Yes, they did. It was more rare. They didn't always have wine, but yes, they did have wine. Beer was more common, but beer also was more common for all people. Wine was a special thing for middle to upper class people. Yep, from grapes. I'm gonna snooze the ad for a second so I can just keep going, and then we'll take the ad in a second. I gotta get some water. You're welcome. So yeah, so these newspaper articles, like, they're not separate new things. When you really read them all together, you realize how repetitive they are and how some of them elaborate and give more information, but you cannot always tell if it's new information or if it's made up information in addition to it, which is like, remember, this is not real journalism that's like has an ethical code. There's no code here. So there's a lot of lying and exaggeration in this time period for newspapers. So the first article, which is here on the left, came from the Birmingham Post, and they specifically did not publish anything new about this until 11 days later. And then were several newspapers in Belfast, Aberdeen, Dundee, Pall Mall, the Daily Post, Essex Standard, Bristol, Leeds, and Liverpool repeated this story in a variety of ways between the two dates. The first article says that several thousand mummified cats have been secured by an English firm for the purpose of selling them for manure, and that they are going to be delivered not in bulk, but in a powder mixed with chemicals to become an even better fertilizer. And the article also mentions that Egyptians have been previously known to sell the mummies to be ground into mummy brown, which we're going to talk about later. I know. So some of the other articles have extra information as to like where the boats docked, and that the mummies have already been stripped of all their wrappings, and that some of the specimens have been taken by the curator of the Liverpool Museum. But what is interesting is that on then February 11th, 1890, there was an auction for these mummies, and that they were not delivered in a powdered form, and in many cases were still wrapped in linen, which essentially proves that those articles were straight up lying. Even the first article was lying and was not saying that. And it essentially appears is that the general public could have gone into, although it's unclear who was allowed in the auction house, it appeared that a lot of people could go in and purchase these mummies. And this was for, I think I have the price somewhere, for 1 shilling and like six pence. You could buy a mummy. 4 shillings and 6 pence was the sum of that you would pay for a single head, and if you wanted a complete body, you'd have to put up 5 shillings and 6 pence. So the very interesting thing is that there doesn't really actually seem to be any evidence that these cat mummies were used as fertilizer. Obviously, the original article implied that that's what they were being shipped to England for, but it appears that the mummies were then kept together. They were not powdered. They were not mixed with chemicals to make a better manure. And it seems to be that there may have been the option is either that they lied originally as to why they were getting sent to England, or that there was a change in heart, in that maybe after that first article, so many people reached out because they wanted to own their own Egyptian mummy, and maybe because they didn't have access, and they didn't have access to be able to go to Egypt, because there really was not people who were bringing these mummies to England to be purchased. You had to go to England to buy these artifacts. Like, really, any artifacts they weren't just getting sent over to England to then be purchased. You would have to go there and get it. And so maybe this was suddenly like, wow, I can actually own something from ancient Egypt. Like, I want to buy it. I don't want it for manure. I want to buy it. And maybe this is just because Egypt was so popular at this time that they wanted the chance to own a piece of history, and so that the owner of these objects decided to change their mind, and they changed it in all the news articles to see, okay, wait, we can change this. And to be honest, who the hell knows? Newspapers back in the day are very hard to verify, nowhere near where modern journalism is, and then the amount of times I've even seen like the slightest bit of evidence of exaggeration or lying is innumerable. I do like that here on the right, there is one drawing of the actual auction, which is this guy holding this like mummified cat and people going crazy. And then I also had to add this image because I found it and I just thought it was way too funny. This is an ad from 1906 in Los Angeles, which I thought was super interesting, being in Los Angeles. That essentially it's a manufacturer of fake mummies in LA that claims to have been profitable for 27 years, but it's now closing its doors to make, the made while you wait is my favorite part. And it's very unclear if they are if these are fake mummies or if these are human remains that they are turning into mummies. It's probably not that, but it might be. Who the fuck knows? It's 1906. It could be anything. I just love the article. I thought it was so funny, and I loved the woman with her glasses looking over this guy. But yeah, it's having made their fortune in fake remains, the American manufacturer closes business, which I just think was so funny. All right. I need to go get some water. We'll be right back. Oh yeah, ad time. Perfect. Okay. We're gonna just like chug this water. I'm hoping the museum is very quiet tomorrow. I think it probably will be. I also scheduled another video to come out today, which it looks like it did. All right. It is going to be a Monday in a couple hours. I know, it already is for you guys. Ugh. Oh, that's so tasty. Doesn't even taste alcoholic. Yum. Wow, I still can't believe I've been able to keep the TikTok live go on for 12 hours. I have 7,000 likes, but only 817 views, which is very low. It's very interesting, kind of how that works out. I love Aperol spritzes. And the best part I felt like a huge hipster because I had them when I lived in Italy. The year before, Aperol did a bigger campaign in America to like get people to like Aperol spritzes, and so I already loved them. So TikTok live is very low. Is that the lowest? TikTok videos get, like, I have more followers on I have more followers on TikTok. My videos get good views, and get way better views, but like TikTok is like, you have to be live. So like my average on TikTok, or my average on Twitch, is like, usually I'm barely getting an average of 20 people in each live. Like, obviously we're very lucky. I don't even know, at max we had like about 70. We're at 63 people right now, which is great, from all those raids we've had. And whenever we get big raids, we do like keep a lot of those people. Like, we had like 200 people on, was that Thursday? But TikTok, like, some videos do great, some videos do bad, and so it's a very different concept. But yeah, in comparison, I barely have 2,300, I have like 2,100 followers on TikTok, Twitch. I can't stand that both of them have have T's at the beginning. But then I have almost 80,000 followers on TikTok, so it's kind of weird. And the other thing is, they don't cross post most of the time. Like, I don't get people who watch my videos on TikTok and also come to my streams, even if they're watching in the TikTok live. Like, Dom, you are a person who kind of jumped both, but there's not a lot of you. There's very little. All right, so let's talk about things that the Victorian general public did, but not what, like, academic. Yeah, we can't cross the streams. Absolutely not. The Schwartz is not going to be happy with us. So we're talking specifically about things that were not done for the academic pursuits of learning, let's say. Well, that's great. Thank you, Kim. I'm glad you do that. I know. And I know people, like, don't do that. And that's why I do post my videos on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. But, like, TikTok is where I get the most revenue. So I'm going to stick with TikTok until it literally dies, because I get so much more revenue. And I'm very happy about that, Roxy. Like, I know I don't want numbers like paleontologizing gets sometimes, or science gets sometimes, because I want to talk to people. Like, I really do want to answer your questions and talk to people. And I feel really bad when I miss questions and stuff like that. And so I don't want crazy numbers. Would I like 60? Yes. Or 70? Yes. I would like that. That would be lovely. But also, what is FWIF? It does in some ways, but very little. Patreon, I get like, I had to lower the tiers. So I used to make like closer to $20 to $30 a month. But now I'm like closer to, I'm barely at 20, maybe 15. It's because I lowered the price of tiers, so it was cheaper. And then, oh, for what it's worth. Oh, thank you. Darius, that's what you said. I was like, what is Darius saying? And I was like, for what it's worth. Thank you. Thank you. I like that I have a manageable people, so I can tell people how the Egyptians did not have Wi-Fi. Ko-Fi helps when I get a good commission. I need to do better advertising about, like, my names and hieroglyphs. I've gotten good money over the years. I once had like 2 people pay me over $100 to do like 6 names and hieroglyphs for their friends, but like those are more rare. It's just harder because I forget to do advertising and stuff. So Egyptomania within the general public. So Egypt in our popular culture during the Victorian era is where you are going to see some of the more normal things, let's say. And essentially what Egyptomania really did to Western people's ideas is really inspire different art forms in an Egyptian style. So there's a very wide range of all of this, and this could be an entire lecture in and of itself, so I'm just gonna go through a couple examples. But we have jewelry, like furniture, architecture, paintings, books, operas, plays, tons of different types of writing, outfits, costumes, like all of these things kind of fall under this like general Egyptomania that we see. Again, in comparison to the Egyptomania wave after the Tutankhamun discovery, this is very small. Really, this type of Egyptomania goes real crazy after that, after Tutankhamun. But there is still a lot of really cool stuff from this time period. I love the freaking Pharaoh gas station. I have no idea where that is I think it's in Britain, but it's fucking crazy. It's so funny to me. And these costume parties are always fun. So, this first one we're going to talk about is the Egyptian revival architecture, because I know somebody asked about this. Again, this could be a whole entire lecture. I'm going to cover just a little bit of it. But this is one of the main influences within the neoclassical movement of architecture. In general, most of this is being inspired by the Napoleonic campaign, but it's present in both Europe and America during the Victorian era. So some instances of this architecture are specifically going to be present in both Europe and America much later. Yeah, I think that's like, I think if somebody goes and writes that down, I think we might do a discussion about it, because it's not that hard. But we can do a discussion about it. If somebody wants to go write that in the Discord, we can absolutely pick that as a discussion for a future date. Because it's not, I don't think I would need to do that much research about the revival to go find some cool images of some of the revival architecture. I know a good amount about it, actually. I read in an Egyptomania book I had to read in grad school. There was a large section about this. So I think we could do that if anyone wants to add it. Thank you, Mark. I knew I could count on you. So some of this architecture, which you can see here. So don't worry, T10 Cat, there's another slide with some more pictures. But these ones right here are specific instances of where Egyptian architecture is being used in a funerary context. And these are structures within funerals, these within cemeteries, these are tombs in cemeteries, but more often than not, they are archways and doorways into these. There's also crypts, there's lots of things that have this Egyptian inspiration. The one over here is one of the older ones. This is the entrance to Highgate Cemetery in London. And then there are also examples of non-funerary contexts, which are fountains, gates, theaters, hotels, the backgrounds of operas. A lot of these have other examples of these like Egyptomania style architecture. It's a lot of the cornices. It's a lot of the columns, a lot of these the pylons. So one of the big things is there is a huge Egyptian revival section that is in America specifically. A lot of them are synagogues. It kind of starts with a synagogue in Philadelphia. There are public buildings such as a police station, a jail. One of my favorites is this one down here, which is it used to be a medical building in the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond. It's now on the campus of Virginia Commonwealth University. And then technically, although I weirdly don't consider it, obviously there's the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., which is technically inspired Egyptian, an Egyptian thing because it's an obelisk. I'm going to be honest, it's really weird. I've grown up near D.C. my entire life. I don't consider that Egyptian, and maybe it's because I've just known it my whole life. Maybe it's because it's made out of bricks and it's not one solid piece like most obelisks. I don't know. I don't see that thing as an Egyptian inspiration. I don't know. It's just something weird about that. I don't know how in my mind it like works like that. It is blank. That's another good point. This is another example of something in America where, yeah, I guess it's thematically, but it's not like all these other things that are very much more prominently Egyptian, sort of. But yeah, I don't know. It's just something weird about it, just maybe because I grew up near it. So it's an Egyptian flavored. So another thing that's very interesting about the Egyptian revival architecture in America is that in the 1880s, there was a very large increase of this type of architecture because Americans were really struggling after the Civil War to define their culture. They never really kind of felt like a cohesive group, obviously, with the separation and the conflict during the Civil War. There was a very big difficulty of like forming what is a national culture. It was such a melting pot. There were so many different types of things. And so I know it sounds weird to think of that, like people tried to force a culture onto the United States, but they did. Like, it sounds weird that an individual would do something like this, but it happened sort of weirdly through many, many different avenues. And so they sort of tried to develop their own style of culture. And unfortunately, something that does not surprise me or probably any of you is that the Americans decided to take things from other famous nations like the Egyptian style, the Greek style, the Roman style, as well as Gothic spires, take things from other famous nations that, yes, in some cases they did have people who descended from these people. No, exactly. No, America's never been a unified country. No, or like unified culture. Like this is them trying to create that, but obviously as they're creating it, they're excluding other people because this is height of, like, this is getting Jim Crow laws and all of those things. So this is why when you go to America, you see courthouses and city halls and public buildings. They got the ancient Greek temple vibe. They got the big columns, they got the porticos, they got the huge ceilings, they got all of these things. That's why DC looks like it looks. The Supreme Court, the Capitol, Library of Congress, archives, like all of these things look like this. And this is, at the time, it was sort of meant to reflect all of the different nations that Americans had come from, but obviously leaving out like a good, I don't know, third, maybe fourth, maybe fifth part of the population, i.e. being African Americans. And so this is an image of the mural above the reading room in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And you can see only a few, but there are other countries, and many other countries are not included in this. But we do have Egypt being included. And you can see it says on the bottom, emancipation, science, written records, religion, like saying these are the cultures that created all of these things, and not including a lot of the other ones. And so this is why Egyptian revival architecture was sort of brought up as well, is because they decided that Egypt is like this. And as we'll talk about later, they are also severely not recognizing that Egypt is an African nation, and that there's a possibility that native Egyptians may be black and maybe closer related to African Americans than they would probably like to because obviously you can't see it because it's black and white. That's a white guy. That's like a super fucking white guy. That's not anywhere close to probably what an ancient Egyptian person would look like. So, moving on, we also have ancient Egyptian style jewelry and like cosmetics and all of these like really cool feminine, but also there's a lot of masculine stuff as well. There's it's on the next slide. I have cufflinks, all of these adornments that are in these Egyptian styles. So most of these objects are not direct copies of pieces that have already been discovered, but have a lot of these common motifs. the winged scarab, the head of the pharaoh, head of the queen Cleopatra, lotus buds you can see up here. I love these columns. Lots of little amulets, the heart, the Ib heart scarabs, a sphinx. Lots of these things are being mentioned. But by and far, the most common motif that you're going to see is scarabs. Scarabs are freaking everywhere. They're on rings, they're on cufflinks, they're on pendants, they're on brooches, they're everywhere. In some cases, some of these scarabs might be genuine. But I'm gonna be honest, it's really hard to tell which ones are genuine and which ones are just not. Because minus looking on the glyphs, but looking from these, like, I could have said that these two probably were genuine and these ones were not. But unless you can see the glyphs, you can't be 100% sure if they're real or not. It's one of the, like, you can see here, these are completely fake hieroglyphs. These don't say anything. These aren't even real hieroglyphs. And they also only, actual genuine scarabs only come in a certain amount of materials. So sometimes they come in different things. 100% real from Amazon. Cool. I actually have earrings that are almost identical to these ones, these cufflinks. But you can tell, like, the carving, these actually are okay hieroglyphs, but I can tell by the stone that they are not, it's not probably a real. These two are the closest ones that actually look like real scarabs, but it depends on the material that the scarab is made of as well. You do have some carnelian scarabs, but it's more rare. It's more likely that they're made out of faience. In a lot of cases. So the other thing is that there are people that probably think that their scarabs are genuine, and were sold to them as genuine, but they're actually not. There are also pieces that are that actually have, that are using stones from genuine, like, that ancient Egyptians actually use, lapis lazuli, carnelian, turquoise. And so there's some great Victorian Egyptian revival pieces, and my gosh, they go for a lot of money, thousands and thousands of dollars. There's some really great websites that sell pieces like this if you guys are interested. Egyptomania in writing. This is still a little bit early for a lot of the real crazy stuff, which comes out again after Tutankhamun's discovery, but it does inspire a lot of different operas, plays, poetry, lots of stuff like this. One piece that I've talked about, which does technically predate the Victorian era by about 10 years, is the first English language book that talks about a reanimated mummy. And this is The Mummy, A Tale of the 22nd Century by Jane Loudon. Jane Webb or Jane C. Loudon, although it was published anonymously at first. But you also have an Edgar Allan Poe poem called Words with a Mummy, and you have a book by Louisa May Alcott called Lost in a Pyramid or The Mummy's Curse. We also have the opera Aida, which was commissioned by the Khedive or Sultan of Ottoman Egypt for a premiere at the Cairo Opera House in 1871. And I know we've talked about this before because there's two weird iterations. There's the Aida opera and there's the Aida musical written by Elton John and Tim Rice in much more recently. And essentially it's a story about an Ethiopian princess who is enslaved in Egypt and her falling in love with, I believe it's a Egyptian general, I think. It's pretty inaccurate. I think it's set in the Old Kingdom, but there's a lot of things in it that are more New Kingdom. It's very inaccurate for the time, and that's understandable. And it's a little bit prejudicial and racist, even though it still happens. It still gets put on quite often, I think now. It's a very, very popular opera. So again, there's so much to talk about within this particular subject that I'd probably love to do another lecture discussion. We can do one on the Egyptian revival, architecture, absolutely, and other Egyptian revival art, because there are other iterations of these there's other iterations of Egyptian revival art, jewelry, writing after Tutankhamun in the 1920s. So there is much more that can still be talked about if we do a fuller discussion and stuff. Yeah, I think I've read the Poe story too. It's been a long time, but I think I know that story. I also know another really racist story that is set in America and has a guy pretending to be a mummy, and there's a very prejudicial character or racist iteration of an African-American slave, and that one was a crazy read because that was sort of a weird... Oh, I don't know if I'll ever find that one again, but that was a very weird story from about obviously the 1860s or something, 1850s maybe. One of my favorite things that we're going to talk about tonight is tourism in Egypt. Again, the opening of Egypt through the Napoleonic campaign was very timely because it was getting towards the time where rich Europeans and some Americans had the time and leisure to travel and vacation to other countries. Prior to that, no one was really traveling very far distances. Rich people would rather go to their second home than travel too far. And this is with the exception of young men who were going on essentially their tours of Europe, which is supposed to be educational, and sometimes they were meant for artists that would go around Egypt or Europe and do art. But essentially it's just a crazy party bachelor tour. But when you get into the late 1800s and the Industrial Revolution, you get the railroad, and then suddenly you get faster ships, and suddenly travel becomes faster and much more accessible to those who can afford it. While Europeans who kind of lived in the north, if they were of ill health, they were often recommended to go either to move to places. Hi, Pattern Juggler. Welcome on in. We're talking about Egyptomania in the Victorian era. Talking about tourism right now. So if you lived in the north of Europe and it was cold and you would get ill a lot of physicians would recommend you to move to places or travel to places like Italy or Greece for the warm, dry air so that you can recuperate. And Egypt now became an accessible place where they could do that. And Lord Carnarvon, who financed Howard Carter's excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb, was one of those persons. He got into a car accident in Germany and he was recommended to go to Egypt to recuperate. And there are several famous, these early Egyptologists slash explorers who were recommended to go to Egypt for this very reason. And then suddenly fell in love with Egypt and got to do stuff with this. Oh, I'm so glad, Pattern Juggler. So, of course, these early explorers prior to the Victorian age were bringing back artifacts to Europe so that the general public could see them. And so it became then known, hey, you could go to Egypt and you could get some artifacts. So this, again, increased the amount of people who traveled to Egypt for the variety of reasons. Yeah, very true. There is still migration for health. It's not the same thing as if you go to Italy, you will be cured of your influenza or your TB. And I'm no, that's not how that works. But yes, it is sometimes said that a dry climate is better for people who are kind of back and forth. Thank you so much, Kaylee. I need to send you a message because you're going to TwitchCon, right? I think you are. Yee. We're doing our lecture. We're very excited. Our brand anniversary. Yes, I gotta send you a message because I wanna. As soon as this weekend is over, I then have to start planning TwitchCon stuff, and so I want to make sure I don't miss anybody who's gonna be there because I want to hang out and meet people. So I'm gonna reach out and we will arrange something. Yee, so excited. We're talking about Victorians and Egyptomania, and so we're talking about tourism in Egypt right now and how that kind of influenced the crazy Victorians. I love these pictures. I think this picture of them eating a dinner in what I'm pretty sure is the hypostyle hall of Karnak is just crazy to me. It makes me laugh. So yeah, so people are going to Egypt because they also realize that, like, if they go to Egypt, they could bring back artifacts as well. Like I said, not a lot of artifacts are being exported out of Egypt for people to purchase. You pretty much had to go there to get items, at least in the early part of the Victorian era. There was a popular travel company called Thomas Cook and Son, and they also transformed Egypt into this ultimate tourist destination. I know I have one from somebody else, and I gotta make sure I wear, I bring it for my lanyard. I gotta bring all my pins. So many pins. And I have stickers now that I can give away, and I got new, what's it called? Business cards. I'm all ready for TwitchCon. So excited. So excited. So, were they still a company? I didn't know that. I only heard about them when I was doing research for this, so that's so funny. They were still around. So Cook owned paddle steamers that were very popular with Victorians, so that the Victorians could travel on the Nile and see a number of historic sites with kind of a limited amount of time, and you could stay on the boat. Obviously, they're very similar to like the modern river boats that we have, but these are paddle boats, so they're a little bit older. But this is like kind of how tourism began in Egypt, is that you would go on your paddle boat down the Nile, and you'd be able to visit so many more temples and ruins along the Nile in a very quick way because you could sail overnight. And the other thing is that while you could always go and visit the temples, you could also go and visit mummy pits. And this is where I'm going to slightly transition to what is a mummy pit and what is a mummy pit and how these are. So this is sort of an example of one of the things that sort of didn't happen, but did happen. But it's a lot of unconfirmed stuff because we just don't know how often it happened. Yeah, it's where they put the deodorant. So essentially, a mummy pit is just a burial. But it is probably a lower class burial because it's not like a tomb. It's more literally just a pit that they would go and bury, and then they would go and find these. But essentially, it was a place where both native Egyptians and these tourists would go and excavate these mummies without any sort of archaeological context or practices at all. The painting on the left is a very famous painting by the Egyptologist Amelia B. Edwards, who went to Egypt as a tourist and then later becomes an Egyptologist, sort of inspired by this trip she did as a tourist. And so she drew this when she was in Egypt, and she included it in a book. Raid number 8. Hi, not a Professor Nap. How are you? Welcome to the stream. How are you doing, not a Professor? What were you talking about today? What were you chatting about? Writing and reading. Oh my god, it's Time Guesser! It's my favorite game! I love Time Guesser. It is hard to type. We love Time Guesser. Oh, we didn't play any of our daily games this morning, which was a little sad, but I love Time Guesser. A genealogy research stream! Oh my god, I'm so pissed that I missed out. That's awesome. That sounds so cool. Well, it is our 5-year brand anniversary, not our stream anniversary, but our brand anniversary. 5 years ago in 2020, I posted my first blog post and Instagram post, which later became the MelissainDeNile brand. So we've been streaming for about 11 and a half hours. Yep. almost 12 hours. We're about to hit 12 hours and 15 minutes, but we're not done with the lecture, and so we're still gonna keep going. But we've been doing discussions and such, and lots of stuff. Oh no! Poor Dapper. I think he may have fallen asleep. That's sad. Let me do somebody's genealogy. I miss genealogy sometimes. But we are talking about Victorian Egyptology and some of the weird things they did and didn't do, and the misinformation about Victorians and Egyptomania. Honestly, not a professor, I'm doing pretty great. I'm only just about a half an hour ago did my back start to hurt. But 12-hour streams are not that bad. Like, I mean, have I done a couple shots over the day? Did I have to smash 2 bundt cakes in my face, including one within the first hour of our stream because we got so many subs somehow? And have we had 8 raids? Yes, you are our 8th raider today, which is great. And we're going to do a whole nother 12-hour stream in November when we have our stream anniversary, and then we're just going to play games all day, which is great. This one was harder, I think, because we were all discussion, so now my voice is starting to go out. I can feel. Yeah, it's like weirdly not that much. Honestly, suddenly it went from 10 o'clock to 3 p.m. and it seems like the last portion of this has been dragging. But honestly, it's keeping to a schedule. That's the hardest part. We've had to skip some stuff that we were gonna do because it's been crazy. It's been crazy. So we're talking about mummy pits. Also, for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is MelissainDeNile. I'm in denial in more ways than one. I stream Egyptology, archaeology, and history-themed games on Twitch. We also do discussions and lectures. So we're doing lectures. I don't want to play Pharaoh. We've slightly already decided what we're going to play in November because Pharaoh makes me sad. I hate city building games. Hell is Us. 10-hour stream. I mean, there are definitely games that I could play for like 10 hours straight and stuff. I would love that, Roxy. I gotta hit you up when things calm down, but I would love to help you with some research. I would love that. I will hit you up. I know, Tom, it's sad. I hate city building games, and that game took so much out of my life when I tried it. That was like 2 years ago. 2 years ago? Probably. It was whenever the Pharaoh and New Era came out, which is about, I think, probably 2 years ago. It just makes me sad and stressed. And I get really quiet. It's also a bad game for me to stream because I get so focused I don't talk to anybody. Tomb Raider is on the list. It's not on the stream anniversary list, but it is on the list. Thank you so much, Darius. Have a great rest of your night. What's anniversary? Is that Tomb Raider anniversary? Or is that a different game? Okay, yeah. I can't remember which ones I own. Tomb Raider is on the list. It's coming. It's coming. Essentially, we're doing Shadows DLC right now, and I'm gonna do a lot of weird demos and short games, and then we're probably gonna pick up a Tomb Raider. I think Tomb Raider is probably gonna be where we're gonna go next, and then when Shadows ends, we're gonna pick up Brotherhood. I think that's kind of the plan. I just don't know which. I don't remember which Tomb Raiders I have. I do own some of them. I just don't remember which one. Yeah, I have no idea. I will take recommendations from anybody. We're probably a couple months out of doing that, but we're close. Okay, so these are called mummy pits. They're essentially pits. Star said something. They're probably like mass burials, family tombs. They're not like the formal tombs. The one thing that I love about this is that I can tell you instantly where this is in Egypt because of some of the details that Amelia Edwards left in the background. This is Thebes. By far none. This is Thebes / Luxor, because you can see here in the top Saf tombs. Saf tombs are a certain type of tomb where they have like all of these tiny columns and a courtyard, and you can see 2 really big Saf tombs here on the top of the hill. those are still there. I could tell you exactly where those are. I think technically that is the tomb of the nobles, which would be specifically not Dra Ubul Naga. It's shoot, what's that other one? It's not Al Asaif, it's not El Hoka, whatever the wherever Rekmire is. Where's Rekmire? And Ramosa. Where's Ramosa? Those two. It's not Dra Ubul Naga. It's because I didn't go to that one when I was in Egypt. It's not Mitrahina. I'm going through all the names in my background. It's very close to wherever Rekmire and Ramosa's tomb. No, not El Asaif. It's the one next to it. It's Deir el Medina. Or sorry, it is Deir el Medina. I do this lovely thing whenever I don't know what I'm talking about, is I go and look on Google Maps and I just scroll over to Egypt and I just zoom in where I know it is. Except of course these are probably not going to be labeled. Sheikh Abd al-Qurna. Yeah, Sheikh Abd al-Qurna. Yeah, so this, I'm 99% sure they're literally sort of across where the street is, somewhere close to Sheikh Abd al-Qurna. Because it's Sheikh Abd al-Qurna, then it's El Hoka, then it's Al Asif, then it's the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, and then Dra Ubul Naga is on the other side of the entrance to the Valley of the Kings. And I didn't go to Dra Ubul Naga, even though I really wanted to. I forgot about it. So this is from Amelia Edwards from her book. This painting is titled "Digging for Mummies." It's in her book called 1,000 Miles Up the Nile. So now, although she technically is described as an Egyptologist, again, she went to Egypt as a tourist. She wrote this book when she traveled Egypt for the first time. She did not really know anything about ancient Egypt before this. And then when she essentially came back to England, she started doing work as an Egyptologist, especially by helping found the Egypt Exploration Fund, which helped do proper excavations in Egypt. And she was very critical of doing proper excavation work. And like, by proper, I just mean literally just trying to record anything. Like, again, we're not up to modern Egyptology standards. We're slowly making our way up. She is the subject of our second episode of my podcast on the Patreon exclusive podcast, Voices on Denial. And I wish I actually went a little bit more nuanced about like how she is sometimes, like, in some spaces would not be considered a legit Egyptologist, but that because she did not go to Egypt with that intention and like had kind of a later in life Egyptology world. So I wish I went a little bit more nuanced in that episode, but she is the subject of that. She's got a very interesting life. Now, the second image dates to around 1880 and the inscription at the bottom says, "Descent into the mummy pits with Medinat Abu, my guide." And I believe it says is represented. That word I really could not read. Trying to break off, quote, "a nice foot," with little exclamation point in parentheses, as a memento of this fantastic spot. Which I think this is a crazy ass image. And so it proves that it definitely did happen. How much it happened is something we'll never know. But this was part of being a tourist. And collecting these souvenirs was one of the main parts of being a tourist when you're in Egypt. And so some articles I read saying that like people smuggled these items out of Egypt, which is like not true. You were allowed to take these items. You would purchase them and you could take them out of Egypt. That was what was legal at the time. And so it was completely legal to buy these artifacts on the art market. There was no black market in this. It was just the art market, and it was just these sellers. And it is hard sometimes to tell whether or not these sellers were selling legitimate things or fake things, because that is also the possibility. Even during that time, they were already starting to produce fakes because of this tourist boom. And in some cases, they were digging up literal mummies, like mummy pits, in these mummy pits, and they were essentially pretending to be an archaeologist and getting that love, which still sort of exists today with all of those fake tombs. If you remember in our debunking video, we talked about fake tombs being found in the past couple years, and these scams where you can discover the tomb yourself and take objects out of this tomb, which is a fake tomb, fake artifacts, fake everything. Another thing that was really popular was to climb the Sphinx, and to climb the pyramids, as well as, like, there's some awesome photos of which I had back here. You have all these people climbing this. You have them eating in temples. I love the pictures of people in front of the Sphinx, because it also gives a lot of insight of, like, when was it actually fully excavated, because you can tell here that its arms are still completely covered in sand. And then you also have the act of carving their initials or carving their full name into these temples and tombs, doing this graffiti. And this was not just done by the general public. There are lots and lots of examples of the actual archaeologists doing this, either painting their names on or carving their names on. Obviously graffiti is bad. No, Mummy Brown is starting right now. Shasta, we're about to start it in just a second. Obviously, oh my God, Mark, where have you been? If you go, so I found out about this when you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and you go to see the Temple of Dendera. It's the first thing that I notice, is that there are names carved everywhere. And like you can see here, like these ladies are literally carving their name. This is, I think, another Amelia Edwards drawing. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it is. And yeah, it was super common. Belzoni's got his freaking name on the inside of the Pyramid of Khafre. Like, yeah, it was super common. Abu Simbel has a ton of them. And while I don't condone graffiti, I will say from an Egyptology standpoint, I find them very fascinating, because more often than not, they're dated. And so it's interesting to me, intriguing, I guess is the better word. Yeah, exactly. You saw them at the Met. The Met that one has a ton of writing. I know that they're bad, but I do kind of like it in a way, because I like that evidence of when somebody saw this temple. And like, I like looking for the earliest year. I know it's bad, but I do like learning about it and recording all of that. The temple in Philae is actually one of the most graffitied, I think. And there's also somebody a long time ago, maybe 2 years ago, somebody was doing a huge 3D scan of the entire thing to record all of the graffiti. And that includes ancient graffiti as well. But graffiti does kind of become part of history. Yeah, it sucks, but I do kind of like it. Sorry. Technically, the last instance we have of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs being used is actually also graffiti at a temple site as well. So there's a lot of graffiti that's actually kind of cool. But don't do it. If I see you doing graffiti in Egypt, I'll whoop your butt. Absolutely not. All right, let's talk about Mummy Brown. People have been wanting to hear this for a long time. I sort of knew it. I'm just kind of avoiding it because it's just kind of, I think in comparison to a couple of these other subjects, it's not like my favorite, but it's just, it's as it is. So Mummy Brown is older than the Victorian era, with indications that some of it has been created as closer to the 12th century. And this would actually line up with when ancient Egyptian mummies were being used to make mummia. And so I don't doubt that these two practices are very much intertwined. And so it appears that the pigment was being made both out of the flesh of ancient Egyptian mummy, or something called a guanche. I'm not sure if you can pronounce this. A guanche mummy, which are indigenous peoples of the Canary Islands that also intentionally mummified their dead. So apparently Mummy Brown is made out of both of these things. And who knows what mixture of which mummies these are made. So that was a shock. I didn't realize that. That was a new thing that I learned. That it's both, they're made out of two different types of mummies. So the earliest record of the use of mummy brown dates before the Victorian age, around 1720, when an artist supply shop in Paris sold paints, varnishes, and powdered mummy. And in 1797, there is a compendium of colors that is published in London and proclaims that the finest brown was used as a glaze by the president of the Royal Academy named Benjamin West, and, quote, is the flesh of the mummy. The most fleshy parts are the best parts, which I think is the best quote I've ever heard. Is the flesh of the mummy, the most fleshy parts are the best parts. Again, is not defined what type of mummy. So it could be both. It could be one or the other. It could be both. Who the fuck knows? We just don't know. So this pigment was very popular from the mid-18th to 19th centuries. However, the demand for mummy brown sometimes exceeded the available supply of true Egyptian mummies, leading, of course, to the occasional substitutions of contemporary corpses of enslaved people or criminals. I.e., exactly like freaking Mumia. But again, like, Mumia by this point had dwindled out of style by the Victorian period. Mummy brown stuck around, which is why I'm talking about it during this section rather than during the things that Victorians didn't do, because it did stick around during the Victorian age. Oh, Mark. No. I don't know. We're going to actually talk about diffusionism in a little bit with one of the dudes we have to talk about, and I'm not happy about it. So let's not talk about race diffusionism and things like that. So I'm honestly not going to be surprised if both Mumia and Mummy Brown were made with the same product, the same mummified, powdered mummy. Because, ironically, the creation of paints would often be done by apothecaries. Because everything that you could use to make paint, you can make into a medicine. And I know this because I literally work at an apothecary museum. And I talk about this all the time. I talk about it because we have so many like things in our collection that are beautifully colored that at certain points the apothecaries who worked there decided to make paint out of them instead of making medicine. Hi Brayden, welcome on in. We're doing a lecture about Victorian Egyptomania. We're talking about Mummy Brown right now. We're also live on Twitch. We're 12 hours in to a 12-hour stream. We're almost done, but we still have quite a few left on the lecture, so, because we got started with it late. I'll give you the tour, Mark. So pretty much like a medicine would get diluted in alcohol, and would be made into like a liquid medicine, while a powder that could have been diluted in alcohol would also could be added to gum arabic to make paint. So literally, like, you can take the same product if it is a pretty color and add it to gum arabic or melted resin, and you could make paint. Well, you could also make it into a medicine if it had So Brayden, we did talk about Mumia, and we talked about how it's not a Victorian practice. It's actually earlier. We did talk about that. We are going to talk about mummy unwrapping parties next, though, which are separate, which doesn't include eating. But Mumia, I have several videos about it on my TikTok if you want to listen to how Mumia is not a Victorian practice, but it is much, much older and was not around during the actual Victorian period. It's a lie! It's a misinformation campaign! Linseed oil. Yeah, linseed oil is another thing you could add to make into paint. So, in 1881, the artist Edward Burne-Jones was reportedly buried with a tube of mummy brown paint in his garden when he discovered its true origins, that it's made out of a mummy. And this mummy brown that's here is actually supposed to be in a tiny coffin or tiny sarcophagus. Mummy brown paint does begin to fall out of popularity at the end of the 19th century, mainly because the fresh supply of mummies diminished and artists were less satisfied with the pigments, permanence, and finish. So this painting here is most likely used with mostly mummy brown, which is why I included it here. And the color itself is a rich brown pigment with a warm vibrancy. Its immediate tint is between burnt umber and raw umber. And it could be used in oil paint or watercolor for glazing, shadows, flesh tones, and shading. But fortunately, the paint itself exhibits very poor permanence. It doesn't last very long. It fades very easily and it cracks when it's used alone. Todd, no, men and women were mummified equally. It was based on more of what you could afford, if you could afford mummification. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter by gender. Good question, though. All right. You ready? You ready, people? The rest of this lecture is going to be about mummy unwrapping parties. Almost the rest of the lecture. Because there's so many. And I went a little too far with this part. So we're going to try to blast through this a little bit. So, we're first going to talk about how the general public did mummy unwrapping parties, and then we're going to talk about how Egyptologists or archaeologists or scientists did mummy unwrapping parties, and there is a distinct difference. This bridges that gap in between what the general public did and what Egyptologists did, so that's why we're putting this last. And one thing you guys might find surprising is that the first mummy unwrapping parties happened before the Victorian era, in the 1820s. But I didn't include it in this section. I did not include it in the section of things that Victorians didn't do because there were still mummy unwrapping parties during the Victorian period, but they started earlier. So we are going to talk about ones prior to the Victorian period, because they kind of set the stage. So, as I mentioned, rich Europeans and some Americans were able to go to Egypt and obtain artifacts as well as mummies. What I didn't mention is that there was also a market for selling artifacts legally. So I actually did mention this earlier, and I forgot that there is sort of one exception to the exportation of artifacts to another city to sell them. And one of the only instances I've sort of found of this is Trieste, Italy. And if you guys ever watched my lecture about an ancient Egyptian mummy that I studied, I call her my mummy, and that traveled across America, she was exported to Trieste, Italy, where there seemed to be some sort of marketplace there, and then was purchased by a ship captain who then brought it back to the United States. Raid number 9! Welcome on in, Volcano Doc. Oh my Lanza. 9 raids in 12 hours. It's gonna be 13 hours by the time we're done, honestly. Welcome on in, Volcano Doc. What were you doing tonight? Ooh, look, a guest. Oh yeah, Nardino. Very cool. Thank you so much. It is our 5-year brand anniversary. We're celebrating it with 12 hours of discussions and lectures. I'm talking about mummy unwrapping parties, and we're talking about Victorian Egyptology and Egyptomania and such. I am MelissainDeNile. I am in denial in more ways than one. I'm an Egyptologist, archaeologist, and I stream Egyptology, archaeology, and history-themed games on Twitch. And we are, again, talking about ancient Egyptomania in the Victorian age. We're talking about the things that the Victorians didn't do, the things that the general public in the Victorian age did, and the things that Egyptologists in the Victorian age did. So we are talking about mummy unwrapping parties. Ooh, for a figure for a grant proposal. Very cool. But thank you so much. Feel free to give us a follow on my socials. I go on TikTok. I post TikTok. We're still live on TikTok for 12 hours. I can't believe that it hasn't completely shut down my computer. But we are trying to blast through the last part of this lecture because technically we've reached our 12 hours about 3 minutes ago, and I can feel my voice going, and I do have to go to work tomorrow. I can feel my voice going. I still have an Aperol Spritz that I have to finish. Oh, I'm starting to die. I'm doing okay. I'm okay right now. My nose is getting very clogged up, which makes it hard to speak. But my butt's starting to hurt sitting in this chair. And I gotta pee. I've only peed once in 12 hours, which is probably very bad. If you guys have not noticed that. I've only gone to the bathroom once, like, hours ago. But I don't have to go to the bathroom, which also means I haven't been drinking enough water, which is very bad, so I'm gonna drink some water. I know it's not a good thing, but I can hold my pee for a very long time because of Girl Scout camp and not wanting to go in the gross latrine. All right, back to unwrapping parties. We're specifically talking about the general public and unwrapping parties and not early scientists, which we will talk about next. Yeah, no we don't pee in Girl Scout camp latrines that have been there for literally 60 years. So we just hold it in, and I've trained my body to not pee when I need to. So I just don't do it. I know I could maybe call out to work tomorrow, but I don't. I probably can't. I have to go in at 9, but the museum doesn't open until 1. So I can sit in quiet for several hours, which is nice. As long as I don't run into my boss, but I can mostly be quiet for a couple hours. Okay. So if you guys remember a lecture I did about an ancient Egyptian mummy that I studied that was purchased in Trieste, Italy by a ship captain. It traveled the United States as sort of a sideshow in the back rooms of taverns in the 1830s, so a little bit earlier than the Victorian era. There seemed to be this center in Trieste, Italy, which, if you've never heard of the city, it's actually the main port city for the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. It was literally their only part of their empire that touched water, and now it is and then it was part of Italy later. And so there were very select groups that were exporting artifacts to a site, to another city, to be sold on the art market. But it's not all the time. Most of the time you had to go to Egypt yourself to buy it. But over time those opened up a little bit. So individuals were purchasing these mummies. They were bringing them back to Europe and America, and in many cases, they were private individuals. They had an interest in Egypt. They were not these people who were actively going to excavate Egypt, and so they were a very loose definition of what an Egyptologist was at the time. And in some cases, these were sideshows. But in other instances, there were more scientific investigations that were mummy unwrapping parties. And so we're going to talk about the two and the differences between them, because there is a little bit of nuance between. So let's talk about the earliest one, which again is not in the Victorian era, but is in 1821. It is done by explorer Giovanni Belzoni, who we hate, and we will talk about him more. I don't consider him an Egyptologist. I only use the word explorer, and we're going to talk about that later. His first public unwrapping was at Piccadilly Circus in London, and it was to an audience of reported thousands. He was an Italian explorer with a taste for showmanship, and ended up working as a British consul general, or worked for the British consul general to transport ancient artifacts back to England. He was the first modern explorer to enter the inner chamber of the Pyramid of Khafre, and made it known by writing his name literally everywhere. And again, I never referred to him as an Egyptologist because he didn't give a crap about learning or preserving Egypt. So yeah, explored it. I love that. Some people use that word for him, and I don't really like it. He was a strong man. We will talk about that as well later. So between 1820 and 1821, he would place many of his personal finds on a public view in Piccadilly's Egyptian Hall, as well as creating models that were taken to Paris, like this one. This is probably a model. And then they were taken to Paris. And following these expeditions, the contents were put up to sale, and most of these things were purchased by two places, either Sir John Soane or the British Museum. And both of them have Egyptian collections still to this day. Now, apparently, before the sale, he had a mummy unwrapping party to welcome his guests. He apparently wrapped himself in bandages to welcome them, but then brought the ancient cadaver in. And a British surgeon named Thomas Pettigrew was assisting him in the unwrapping, and we're also going to come back to him next. It was technically advertised as an event for medical professionals, but it was essentially just like a way to bring in a large body of professional men, and then they unraveled the body, and then it was put on display with the other objects that he took, and then the auction began. There's not as many details as this as I would like there to be. I would like to dive in a little bit deeper to see if I can find any more details of like the mummy and anything else. Next, we have Mr. Thomas Pettigrew, who we just mentioned. So after this first unwrapping party, Thomas Pettigrew essentially became popularized by continuing this mummy unwrapping format. And he performed another mummy unwrapping at the Royal College of Surgeons in 1834. He did a series of these unwrappings, which gained him the nickname Mummy Pettigrew. He was known as Thomas Mummy Pettigrew. Yeah, I think he probably is. This guy seems like a weasel. So I was originally going to talk about him in the later portion of this, where we talk about the scientific mummy unwrappings. Hi, Silva. Welcome on in. But when I found out he was involved with Belzoni, I decided to push him up to this section because he continued to do these publicly. Oh, there's an ad break. Ah! We're gonna drink. I forgot. I was gonna dismiss that. We can never stop the ads. Fine. I don't have to pee. But I will. There's so much shit on the floor. Bio break. I needed to go rest in a room. Needed to go rest in a room. Just got a very weird comment on on TikTok or on YouTube. God buries the fake gods and people bring them back. Unbelievable. Oh my God, Silva. Okay, I gotta wait until the ad is over on TikTok or on Twitch because everybody needs to hear what you just said because that is so fucking funny. The HD, it is the relieving chamber. Oh my God, I got 24 seconds. That is so good. That is so good. My nose. 8 seconds. I should put that on the front door of the bathroom. It's called the relieving chamber. I think I might make a sign like that. Everybody on Twitch, Silva on TikTok said the funniest thing ever. Can we say mummy unwrapping parties were the precursor for influencer unboxing videos? And that is absolutely true. Absolutely true. I think that might be very funny to make a sign that looks like the relieving chambers and put it on my bathroom. Maybe I'll sell those. That sounds really funny. Yeah. These are a weird way of showing off your goods. Yeah. This is just like a funny see what you got. I can't wait to something I'm going to tell you guys about next that is going to make you laugh so hard, Silva. Thank you so much for the finger hurt. That's going to make you laugh so hard because it is even more just like those influencers, but it's I think it's the next guy we talk about. Maybe the next guy. So Thomas Pettigrew does all of these mummy unwrappings. They're all public. He does these as like things, events for the general public. The unwrapping would involve separating the different layers of bandaging, removing amulets from their layers to reveal the body themselves. And because this is done, it's not done in front of the general public. It's done mostly in front of surgeons and like people of a higher class, but they're talked about by the general public. He still sort of considers these like scientific and that like they're sort of anatomy like courses almost. And they would look at body decorations. They'd look for the presence of hair, pliability of skin. And then they would also like freaking guess the ethnicity of the mummy, which like great, cool, great for the time. Which was very interesting because there's also rumors that some of the mummies that Thomas Pettigrew was unwrapping were not actually ancient Egyptian and may have been pulled from local burial grounds, which is rumors that were talked about. So because of these early famous individuals conducting mummy unwrapping parties, this essentially opened the floodgates for anyone to have access to a mummy to be able to host a mummy unwrapping party. At the moment, I haven't been able to find a lot about these private mummy unwrappings that are happening at like, say, like private homes, but it is a really great interest to me that I want to continue digging to see like in newspapers if I can kind of find more things about these private ones. One of the most popular images when you read about mummy unwrappings is this invitation from Lord Lunsborough for inviting you to a mummy unwrapping party in the 10th of June in 1850 at Piccadilly. The mummy from Thebes will be unrolled at 2:30. And so it's a thing that pops up a lot, but I don't know if it's a real invitation. It's kind of vague. So I need to I really would love to do more in-depth research like in newspapers, and maybe we can do one. I would love to do it actually as a discussion because I have a lot of access to newspapers. I don't unfortunately have a lot of access to British newspapers, but we can try to look through. It does, and we actually said he might be related to Peter Pettigrew, who betrayed the Potters. My favorite unwrapping party is Mr. George Glidden. So Mr. George Glidden is an American. Well, he's not an American, but he does the unwrapping parties in America. He is kind of the person to bring them to America. And there's not many that happen in America versus the UK and Europe, but there are a few, and he does most of them. So the first public unwrapping of a mummy in America was performed before a small audience of medical and scientific gentlemen in New York City's Castle Garden. This one was not done by George Glidden, but this was done. It's unclear who initiated this unwrapping, but the mummy had been brought by Captain Larkin Thorndyke Lee and was unwrapped publicly to examine for what seems to be more scientific curiosity than like sideshow kind of shit. And if you remember anything about my American mummy that I've talked about, it was also owned by a Captain Larkin, but a Captain Larkin Turner, which has led to very confusing research rabbit holes of two different Captain Larkins that owned mummies and brought them to America, which is really annoying. And I'm 99% sure they both came through Boston, which is even weirder. So then you also have another one that is done, held by Reuben Peale, at his New York museum in 1826. The Peales are a very famous American family, in which many of them are artists, but they also are sort of the earliest precursors for the museum world in America. The Peales, P-E-A-E, wait. The Peale, yeah. The Peales. P-E-A-L-E, Peales. I did write this with my notes with audio, so it does actually say Peales with 2 E's, but it's P-E-A-L-E. And they had some famous museums in New York and Baltimore, and I think maybe even Philly. And a couple of them are artists as well. Is Reuben Peale? They're brothers. I always forget if Reuben Peale's the artist or if he's the brother, or if he's the museum guy. I can't remember. So this mummy unwrapping was 2 different mummies. No children were allowed to go and see the unwrapping, but not a lot of other details are available. So the one I really want to talk about is George. Mr. George Glidden. This is also one of the only ones that takes place during the Victorian age. The other ones are earlier. They were usually kept by the museum or kept by, and it wasn't bones. Most of the time they were full mummies. Like they weren't, they had all the skin and stuff. They're not peeling off the skin. They're just peeling off the linen layers. But they have gone into museums. A couple of them we know where they are. These ones in particular, as you can see, there's the mummy there that has been unwrapped. A couple other ones we probably don't know where they are, unfortunately. They might have disintegrated. I mean, this definitely is not great preservation tactics. So George was a British-born son of a U.S. consul in Egypt. He went to Egypt a lot when he was very young. Tyra Blodge, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome on in. We're doing a lecture about mummy unwrapping parties. Or Victorian Egyptomania, but talking about mummy unwrapping parties. So, he lectured on Egyptian archaeology as well as published several works about ancient Egypt. I don't consider him an actual Egyptologist, because mostly because him and his father were active in procuring skulls for a man named Samuel George Morton, who was collecting these remains to bolster his theories on polygenesis, the idea that races of man had sprung from different progenitors. And of course, one of the key arguments of this is that different races had different brain capacities and hence the interest in skulls. No, I don't consider him an early American Egyptologist, even though he did write about Egypt and talked about things like that. Very racially charged, unacknowledged, and the unacknowledged goal of a lot of these unwrappings were to prove that Egyptians were not of the black race, and remember, we're still before the Civil War, and obviously long before the Civil Rights Movement. So they're trying not to connect them with slavery and slaves, enslaved people and stuff. So it's hard. Very good question, Brayden, because you're right. The ones at the Smithsonian are completely unwrapped. I don't believe that they are, but I don't know what their provenance is. I would have to look into it. They could have been, but I don't know if we know that they are part of a known mummy unwrapping party. Some early scholars did unwrap them, and we're going to talk about why in a second. But yeah, you're right. Those ones are completely naked. Not a wrapping on them. Yes, we did a lot of harm. So I'm not going to consider a person who was a sincere follower of these thoughts to be an actual Egyptologist, even though, yes, there are some old Egyptologists who are considered Egyptologists but still believed that at the time. Blah, 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 whatever. So Glidden had tried to acquire several mummies before the 1850s, but was unsuccessful due to mostly shipping problems because he lived in America. But in 1850, he did acquire 2 mummies and was advertising that there was going to be a public unwrapping in Boston. More often than not, these mummies were, when these mummy unwrappings happened, almost all of them were usually described as female priestesses or princesses or even the princess who saved Moses from the Nile. Like, literally so many of these, literally the article I was reading, it was he couldn't get somebody from Egypt to ship him a mummy. He just kept asking people for mummies and nobody would ship one to him. That's literally what it meant. He was just having a really tough time at trying to get one, and no one would sell one to him, because he was still living in America. So Glidden did exactly what had been done before, and he claimed that this mummy that he was about to unwrap was a priestess, and then later he claimed it was a princess. And so he conducted this unwrapping over the course of 3 days of lectures, which I think is this pamphlet. I think this is the same pamphlet. This says in November 4th, 1850. So I think this is the actual pamphlet. Yeah, Wednesday, and this could be other things, but I think this might be the one. Oh no, this is for Philadelphia. So this is the one after the one we're going to talk about. So in Boston, he is doing 3 days of lectures. He's going to unwrap this mummy, and he's slowly unwrapping the mummy over the course of the 3 days. And on the third and final day, when he is unwrapping this mummy, it is obvious that this mummy is not a female. And I quoted, exhibiting in its fossil state the erect, unequivocal mark of its sex, which is another amazing quote from tonight. Exhibiting in its fossil state the erect, unequivocal mark of its sex. This mummy was male, very obviously to everyone, and he was mortified. He tried to explain the error as a result of the mistake of the undertaker. The newspapers ripped him to fucking shreds. They absolutely were making so much fun of this guy. And it's really funny and really satisfying. And there's this poem that I'm going to read to you about this event. Glidden had an explanation, nearly ready for narration. Gentlemen and ladies, said he, this had surely been a lady, but the blundering undertakers, or the blundering coffin makers, in the Theban shops of mummies, proved themselves a set of dummies, and misplaced the lady's body, but this base-born male Tom Noddy. Great applause this statement greeted from the folks around him seated. 'Twas a genuine Boston notion, thus to settle the commotion. All abused the mummy bakers, stupid Theban undertakers, for their blundering egregiousness and their treatment for their blundering egregious and their treatment sacrilegious of their holy priest's ashes, and for sending them such trash as this male mummy with the label of a lady on the table, which is also an absolute great poem. But yeah, the papers ripped him to shreds, and Silva, this is what I was talking about with like the Labubu unboxings, all that. Like, I want this one, and you don't get this one. This is literally why that made me laugh so hard, because I instantly thought of like, oh, I want the purple one, but I don't want the black one, or something. Like, I don't want the gray one. I don't want whatever their fucking names are. I fucking hate Labubus. But like, I don't want this one, and then you open up and you get that one. That's exactly what this thing just like reminds me of. Is that another one that you found? There was once a mummy all wrapped who was hiding a glorious sack when George... or did you make that up? When George Glidden unwrapped it, he wanted... You just wrote that? That's so good. There once was a mummy all wrapped who was hiding a glorious sack. When George Glidden unwrapped it, he wanted to sack it, but ended up putting it back. I love that. That's so fucking good. Rabubu star. I fucking hate that. I hate it, but I love it. The Rabubu. They're all different little iterations of Ra. But yeah, they all wanted this hot female mummy. They wanted it to be associated with like the Moses myth. They wanted all of that. And yeah, it just, unfortunately, it bit George Glidden in the ass, unfortunately. So he really could not dispose of this turmoil. Essentially, he really tried to explain that there was like an error, that he couldn't decipher the hieroglyphs correctly, but the incident like really wouldn't die. So he kind of fled to Philadelphia, which is, I think, where this is from, because this says the lower saloon of the Chinese Museum, and at the bottom it says Citizens of Philadelphia. So this advertisement on the left here seems to be from when he was in Philly. So he went to Philadelphia and he advertised a mummy unwrapping again, and he did unwrap mummies in Philadelphia. Another was found to be a woman, and then one was actually found to be a young child. And then he took his show to New Orleans, which is such an interesting place and is probably the most southern place that I have found an Egyptian mummy being on display in early America. And so he presented it to the medical college of what later became Tulane University, which is really sad to say, because en route, the mummy, after he gave it to this medical college, they fucking lost the mummies. There were 2 mummies, one of which is here, you can see, or maybe 2, maybe these are both. 2 mummies were fucking lost by this medical college, and were found in the 1970s in a storage room underneath Tulane's stadium, and nobody knew they were there. And so they're now part of Tulane's collection. They're okay. They're in okay preservation state. But they were literally found in the 1970s, like underneath this stadium. Yeah, it's a crazy. That story is really crazy. And I think only one maybe was part of the unwrapping. I think this one, but yeah. Essentially, after this, he quit the lecture circuit. He was appointed the deputy agent of the Honduras Interoceanic Railway in Honduras. But then he died from a malignant fever in Panama in 1857. So good riddance. I don't know how they survived. I really don't. Because you're right. It should be not. It should have been not good. For like 100 years of being unidentified where it was. It's a whole nother story. I can find out more if you guys want to know, but it's crazy. Okay. The last ish section. Oh my god, it's 10:30. Okay. We can power through. I don't know when the live stream ends. It ends when this lecture ends, and I still have some time to go. We're going to power through. We're going to do it. So, I talked about the mummy unwrappings that are more public, that are more unethical. Let's talk about some more that are scientific. I'm not going to say they're morally ethical or anything like that, but these are more ethical than the ones we just talked about. Most of these are being conducted during the Victorian period because Egyptology is not concrete. They are not following scientific method until much later, things kind of like that. And it's also hard to tell when mummies were unwrapped or if they were unwrapped, because some of the Egyptologists just did it and they didn't write it down. The records are like really bad. But they're trying to do this for science, at least trying to. So the first one we're going to talk about is Gaston Maspero. He was a French Egyptologist and the Director General of Excavations and Antiquity for the Egyptian government in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. He led quite a few archaeological missions in Egypt on behalf of the French, which later became the French Institute for Oriental Archaeology. It appears that he is probably the main person for unwrapping and examining many of the mummies that were found in the Deir al-Bahri cache in 1881. If you don't know what that discovery is, in 1881 there was a hidden tomb discovered near Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. Thank you, Leonardo. It's our brand anniversary. Talking about unwrapping parties and Victorian Egyptomania. We're trying to power through. We just finished. We've surpassed the 12 hours, but I think this happened last year where we went to 13 hours or something. So, I know, very weird stat. This is a very weird painting that I don't know how accurate it is or if it's recent or something. So essentially this was a a tomb cache that was found near the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut that had 40 mummies, including many mummies of famous pharaohs in the New Kingdom, like Seti I, Amenhotep I, Thutmose III, Ramses II. Gaston Maspero published a book on this find in 1889, but I'll admit it's in French, and I have not read it to examine how many of the mummies he actually purposely unwrapped. It appears, when you look at the current images of all of the mummies, it looks like almost every single one from this cache was unwrapped, minus a few that appear to only be partially unwrapped. The most famous one that is not that was never unwrapped is the mummy of Amenhotep I. He was purposely unwrapped because it appeared that his mummy had never been looted when after his burial, but was relocated to this tomb in essentially by itself in contained area. And so it was sort of determined that they didn't want to unwrap this one. A lot of these mummies, because they had been looted and then were relocated to this cache, a lot of them were in bad states when Gaston Maspero and the other archaeologists found them. A lot of them had already been partially unwrapped because the looters would rip the bodies to shreds to look for amulets, gold, jewelry, lots of things within the mummy. So he didn't probably, well, I have to look deeper into the actual like French records and stuff. He probably didn't fully unwrap most of them. Yes, and they did do some rewrapping. Well, I guess that's true. I guess I forgot about that. Yes, they were unwrapped by the looters, and then in the Third Intermediate period, they were rewrapping. The priest who put them back in the cache rewrapped them. I forgot about that. Yes. So there was some rewrapping that is still technically historical, but just not as old as when the mummy died. His record keeping was okay. There are quite a few publications of his. I've read some of them. Unfortunately, they're in French, so I don't, you're getting ahead of me. You're getting ahead of me, Star. That was the next thing. Istem Keb D, who was the wife of the Theban high priest Pinegem II, was also left unwrapped. That's my next note. You're fine. I looked through the whole list on Wikipedia. There are a couple probably that are, it just said 5 random mummies. It didn't have any names for them. Those are probably also also unwrapped. Maybe unwrapped as well, but it's not clear. But yeah, his record keeping is not great. I'm saying a medium. I'm giving him a D, probably. He was less of a full excavator and more of a collections manager for the most of his career, so it's also a different type of record keeping. So Ramses II's mummy is in this cache. So it was discovered in this cache because essentially a lot of tombs in the Valley of the Kings were, in what condition? Not great, but not horrible. He's got a pretty good mummy, actually, now that I think about it. His face is pretty, because Ramses II's mummy is what inspired the 1932 mummy that was played by Boris Karloff. He looks like him. So his mummy's not in the worst condition. It's actually pretty good. He had a pretty high-class mummification for sure. What? The onions in their ears? What are we talking about? I actually, Star, because of this, I really want to do 2 discussions about the 2, maybe not. What are you talking about? There are no onions in, do you mean in ancient Egyptian mummies' ears? What are you talking about? In their eyes? What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about at all. I might be going crazy. Maybe I'm reading things wrong. Is that true, Star? I've never heard that before. I've never heard that before. I mean, they were buried with onions to eat onions, but around them? I'm blanking. I've never heard of that. Star, if you have any... She had some? Huh. Good to know. I had no idea. Onions? Very weird. Okay. I'll have to look into that. That's weird. So again, so I believe he at least maybe supervised the unwrapping or personally did some of the unwrapping of some more mummies. I was able to find this drawing that you see here, which is apparently the unwrapping of Ramses II, which was at the Museum de Balak, which was the original ancient Egyptian museum in Cairo before the Tahrir Square building was built. And Maspero is in the center here. And he did this unwrapping in the presence of the Khedive at the time. And this is in a book called The Illustrious World, published in 1886. So some of these may have been more public, but you can see like most of these are Egyptian officials and stuff. So it's not the same. It's not the same thing, but also not a different thing than scientists and anatomists watching the unwrapping. The next guy is going to be Grafton Elliott Smith. So he is also another guy who is going to be unwrapping some of the royal mummies around the same time as Gaston Maspero. He was an Australian-British anatomist and Egyptologist. It appears he's probably the person who unwrapped the royal mummies that were found in a different cache called KV35. This tomb is discovered in March of 1898 by French Egyptologist Victor Lorette, who at the time held the permit for the entire Valley of the Kings. And while this tomb was originally meant for the pharaoh Amenhotep II, in the Third Intermediate Period, it becomes a cache where priests reburied other royal mummies, very similar to DB 320. And so this tomb includes the mummies of Thutmose IV, Amenhotep III, Meren Ptah, Seti II, Siptah, Ramses IV, V, and VI, Queen Ta, the unidentified younger lady, and many more. Almost all of these mummies are currently unwrapped, and it appears that Mr. Smith was in charge of examining most of these mummies. So he technically studied medicine, obtained an appointment by the Cairo School of Medicine in 1900, and then became an archaeological advisor to museums and archaeological surveys nearby. He was one of the first people to use non-destructive x-rays to study mummies, but he did obviously unwrap some of them as well. It kind of depends on when x-rays were more accessible. It's probably later he did that, obviously, and unwrapped them before. I will also mention that a lot of these mummies were also unwrapped. Not a lot of these are, no. Leonardo, if you look up a lot of the mummies now, they're most likely not rewrapped after this point. All of these mummies that I've mentioned, almost all of these are in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in a special mummy room downstairs. And most often than not, they're unwrapped, but they usually have a cloth that covers up most of their body. Some of them not, but most of them have some sort of like privacy cloth. No, Baha, very good point. Yeah, no, some of them are probably not that flexible, and some of them probably are covered in resin. So some of them are probably ripping off some skin or some other stuff, like Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun was covered in resin, and that was really, they ripped off so much of his fucking body when they unwrapped him, which is so stupid. This is why we don't unwrap mummies. It's hard to find any scientific publications of how unwrapped mummies, how he unwrapped the mummies during these oh my god, I cannot speak. In examinations. I'm tempted to say he had slightly more nefarious reasons for unwrapping mummies than Gaston Maspero, because guess what? This guy also looked at the skulls and the brains of ancient Egyptians. He was a proponent of something called the hyper-diffusionist view of prehistory, which is a pseudo-archaeological hypothesis that postulates the certain historical technologies or ideas were developed by a single people or civilization and then spread to other cultures. At first, this doesn't seem like the worst idea when you think about it, but when you look at it further, he supported essentially the European origin of humankind as opposed to models of Asian and African origin. And so he argued that Europe was the cradle of humanity and that there was a European Mediterranean race that spread into all parts of the world, including Egypt. And that This was a very prominent theory around this time that's definitely racist, in that essentially they, again, don't want to associate ancient Egyptians with other African nations, and they saw them as lesser. And so literally the ancient Egyptians are actually a European race that came into Europe via the Mediterranean. So when he was examining ancient Egyptian skulls and skeletal remains, he may have been more focused on the shape of the skulls and how the similarity to European skulls. So it's a sad thing that a lot of these things were done into science, especially a science that is so subtly racist and obviously racist now. And it went under the radar for so long because of the time period that this was happening in. And when we now look at it, it's so obvious that it was just so biased, but back then it wasn't. This theory of hyperdiffusionism was very popular during the age of colonialism because it showed how both missionaries and engineers and prospectors spread civilization all over the earth, as essentially the colonial nations believed that they were currently doing themselves. And later this theory really supplied a single simple explanation for these amateur archaeologists that wanted this Eurocentric view on history. Yeah, it is. It is, Brayden. Absolutely it is. Okay. Oh my God. We're still so close. All right. The last popular mummy unwrapping party, and probably one of the last mummy unwrappings we're going to talk about, is Margaret Murray, who was an Anglo-Indian Egyptologist and archaeologist. She was the first woman to be appointed as a lecturer in archaeology in the United Kingdom at the University College London, which we talked about last week. It's also where Amelia Edwards helped found the Egypt Exploration Society, where Flinders Petrie was a professor, and where I studied abroad for a semester. She attended UCL under Flinders Petrie, who encouraged her early academic publications and appointed her to be a junior lecturer in 1898. And then she also took part in Petrie's excavation in Abydos to help discover the Assyrian temple. To top it all off, she's also a historian and folklorist who was the president of the Folklore Society in the 1930s. She wrote several books on this was kind of a later in life thing after Egyptology. She wrote several books on folklorist and history of witchcraft. So she's sometimes dubbed the grandmother of Wicca, which is very cool as well. She's also a huge feminist. She joined in Women's Social and Political Union, participated in marches like the Mud March and the Women's Coronation Procession. She's a pretty cool person. But let's go to the unwrapping. So in 1907, Petrie excavated a tomb called the Tomb of the Two Brothers. This is not the tomb from Saqqara with Neank-Khnum and Khnum-Hotep. This is a different tomb. This is from the Middle Kingdom. And these guys are definitely brothers because both of their coffins state they have the same mother, but they might have the same father. There was actually a DNA test that established that they were either brothers or half-brothers. And again, might have different fathers. And so this was two Egyptian priests named Nakht Ankh and Khnum Nakht, who lived during the 12th dynasty of the Middle Kingdom. And it's 1907, so these finds were taken to the Manchester Museum, and then it was decided that Margaret Murray was going to publicly unwrap one of these mummies, which you can see pictures of and articles of here. This took place at the Manchester Museum in May 1908. It represented the first time that a woman had led a mummy unwrapping, and it was attended by over 500 onlookers and attracted a lot of press attention. The mummy of Khnum Nakht was unwrapped publicly, and then the other mummy was unwrapped around the same time, but privately. Margaret was very, very keen to emphasize the unwrapping was for scholarly understanding of the Middle Kingdom and its burial practices, and really lashed out against members of the public who saw it as immoral. She said, quote, "Every vestige of ancient remains must be carefully studied and recorded without sentimentality and without fear of the outcry of the ignorant." Which, she's very cool. I think she's a very cool person. Still not the best thing to unwrap, obviously, but we're still, remember, it's 1907. This is of the time, unfortunately. She subsequently published a book about her analysis of the two bodies called Tomb of the Two Brothers, which is a key publication on Middle Kingdom mummification practices in the 21st century. She died at the age of 100 in 1963 after working for UCL for much of her adult life. So while Margaret Murray's was the only public unwrapping of the ones that we just mentioned from like scholars, these three examples were more acts of scientific analysis than the sideshows that we talked about earlier. And obviously not all of them were done for the most ethical reasoning, and then obviously in comparison to what we'd consider now, with CT scans and x-rays, those are the only ways to really digitally unwrap these mummies without ruining preservation. It's detrimental. It's detrimental to their preservation, and it also is unethical to kind of expose these human beings that are not artifacts, they are human beings, and unwrapping them is just not done academically, non-academically, only digitally, nothing else. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is Victorian Egyptologists that are not great, and then some Egyptologists that are okay, but that's going to be very brief. So I did a slight section just about Belzoni. I'm really going to blast through this because I don't know why I included this at the very end. I can't talk about every single Victorian Egyptologist who either did respect Egypt or didn't, but there are some that I wanted to mention on the bad side versus... Budge is not Victorian. Actually, I don't fucking know. He might be Victorian, but he's not included. Yes, Leonardo. I will say, I forgot to... That is a good point. They did lead to important discoveries. They did teach us about how mummies were wrapped. They did teach us about like where amulets are. It taught us about the mummification process, and especially how it differed. Like Margaret Murray's was very important because we had not done a Middle Kingdom unwrapping. It did teach us stuff. It absolutely did. Granted, they weren't recorded as well as we would like them to be, but yes, they did teach us things that some digital unwrapping would not have been able to do. But now we can get most of that information digitally. Very good point. Yeah, it did help us a little bit. I think we could probably get most of the information now, but it's just based on the technology, and it's based on everything changes. The morals and ethics always change in all these fields. Oh, what do their names translate to? I do not know. Khnum obviously is a god. And what does Nacht mean? I feel like I know somebody. I know another person named with Nacht, and I just don't know what that name means. I don't think I know off the top of my head. I'm sorry. There is if you look up the Tomb of the Two Brothers, it will be the first one that pops up. It might be on Wikipedia. Oh, Star says strong, so it's probably Strong of Amun. Amun is strong. And what was the other guy's name? I don't even remember. Nacht Ankh. Strong. Life is strong. Something about life or life will something along that lines. Yeah. It could be strength of Khnum. Yeah, something like that. It's hard. I'd have to see the actual hieroglyphs to really know exactly what they say, but it's possible. Okay, let's talk about fucking Belzoni. Okay, I didn't include Budge on this, so, because Budge is a little bit, when all the shitty things you do is a little bit later, but, I missed that one, but that's fine. And I had to say it, in comparison to the people we're gonna talk to, Budge is not that bad. Budge is, the only reason we don't like Budge is because his translations are bad. They're not as bad, he's not as bad as these guys. So, yeah, I would not put, Budge is bad in different ways. I would put Budge in a different category. Yeah, I don't believe that they're still publishing him either, but, like, he's definitely not as bad as these assholes. So technically Belzoni does die before the Victorian era. I really thought he was included in this part, but he actually died before then. So he just is a big asshole and a big influencer of early Victorian Egyptologists, so I fucking included him anyway, which is so stupid. I should have not included him because I don't want to talk about him. Otherwise known as the Great Belzoni, he's a prolific Italian explorer. the Wikipedia says he's a pioneer archaeologist of Egyptian antiquity, and that's like absolutely ridiculous because I would absolutely not give him that title. You might have heard he was a strongman, a sideshow, and a traveling circus, which is absolutely true. In 1812, he left England for a tour of performances in southern Europe. He met an emissary of the Pasha in Egypt, and for some reason, he wanted to show this emissary a hydraulic machine of his own invention to raise the waters of the Nile, and was obviously not approved. But somehow that got a connection to Egypt, and so he was sent to Egypt by Henry Salt, the British consul, to help remove the Great Colossus bust of Ramses II, which you can see here is also called the Younger Memnon. And it seemingly seems he was just sent there on the recommendation of an Orientalist with obviously no background or skill or anything, because he was a strong man and probably a good, like, had a lot of charisma. So this piece is now on view in the British Museum, where you can see there's this large hole in his pectoral muscle where somebody tried to fucking take him back to England. He also deliberately broke column bases in the Ramesseum to be able to get this piece out. He's also the first person to enter the Pyramid of Khafre in 1818, which he seemingly did on for normal excavation reasons, but I also can't find any details of how he got in, so I'm nervous he used dynamite or something bad. He also did a couple other things, excavating the Valley of the Kings, bring back objects to London, and then obviously showed to Piccadilly, and then did the mummy unwrapping party, and he eventually dies of dysentery in the Kingdom of Benin when he was trying to travel to Timbuktu, which is hysterical. And another British explorer said that he was actually murdered and robbed, so let's hope that's what actually happened to him. Speaking of dynamite, not a Professor Knopp, let's talk about these two shitholes and the other guy that I couldn't find a photo of. This is where you know I'm getting really tired, as I'm starting to curse like crazy. So there's three guys, but I can't find one of the photo or drawing of one of the other guys. So these three guys are John Shea Paring, William Howard Weiss, and Giovanni Battista Caviglia, which we heard actually in the the documentary at lunchtime. We heard two of these guys' names. Oh, no, actually not in the documentary, in the Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour. So in 1837, these two shitholes began excavating in Giza, and doing probably the worst thing that they could possibly do. They used gunpowder to force their way into several monuments and reach chambers within them. Most notably, they did this with the Pyramid of Menkaure, and then along with another gentleman, Cavigula, he had blasted through the south side of the stress relieving chamber at the top of the King's Chamber, the relieving galleries we talked about. And so he joined up in them, and they also used more gunpowder. But apparently Caviglia couldn't get up to he went on the south side of the stress relieving chambers, but he couldn't get up at all. So then he gave up. So then Weiss and Paring decided they thought there were more chambers, so they went on the north side, and they were able to blast up through those chambers and found those. And then the three men seem to have gotten in quite a heat, as there's lots of different versions of the events that are contested by letters. In that some of the men betrayed the confidence, and then they were removed from the site. They claim the discoveries for themselves. I can't stop laughing and cussing and not being able to breathe out of my nose. So they're assholes. They did technically do some documentation. They created some maps. Those are the ones we saw during the discovery tours. And they did do some decent maps and cross sections of the pyramids, but the use of gunpowder is so egregious that I don't give a shit about what else they did. So yeah. Not great with these early Egyptologists, and these are the only two that I'm going to talk about, but there's, again, several others. Budge and language is sucky. And yeah, there's absolutely more. And there's also more archaeologists that are non-Egyptologists that suck during this time period, too. The Guardian of the Anus is just so funny. I can't wait to make a video of that. I bet if it doesn't go viral, I'll be so pissed off. So in some ways, I give some of these archaeologists and Egyptologists the benefit of the doubt. Because, again, Dom, when we did a discussion about ancient Egyptian medicine, we discovered that there was a title for certain doctors that were called the guardian of the anus. And they don't totally know what the title means, but it obviously means a butt doctor. And so we just thought it was so goddamn funny. And I kept saying that we were talking about butt stuff, and it just got absolutely out of hand. And so we did the discussion so that I could make a TikTok series about medicine. And so now I have a list of all these episodes that I need to write, and the guardian of the anus is absolutely one of the first ones I'm writing because it's so funny. And there's an entire article that's dedicated to all of the shepherd. Yes, shepherd or guardian. I think shepherd and guardian is the same word. It's just two different translations of that same word, because I have ancient Egyptian dog names that can be translated as shepherd or guardian, like the same word. So I think it's the same word, but I also think shepherd or the guardian as a translation is even funnier than or shepherd of the anus is even funnier than guardian of the anus. But yeah, sorry, explaining our random lore. So yeah, in some cases I give these guys a benefit of the doubt because they are men of the time. We can't take our own modern knowledge of what preservation is like and what morals and ethics that we currently have, and we can't put them on these people, just like we can't for ancient Egyptians. But it definitely, a lot of these people, the intention behind what they were doing was much more treasure hunter than scientific explorer who wanted to learn more. And that's kind of the key difference. The last section of this is so short because I got so tired when I was writing this, is giving a little bit more benefit of doubt and giving a little bit of shout outs to archaeologists and Egyptologists who really tried their best and tried better for the time period. So some of the people that we've already talked about as actually, and there are more. I was trying to find more people that I could think of from this time period, but these are like the top people that I think of. You have Flinders Petrie. I also want to shout out his wife, Hilda. You can see them up in the corner. Hilda's awesome. And did she sort of just follow around her husband? Yeah, but did she do a lot of really cool archaeology because of it? Yeah, she did. So Flinders Petrie is sometimes called the father of modern archaeology. He's really one of these first people to systematically excavate, take really good records, publish his finds. Is he... Yes, we're not gonna talk about the other shit that also happened, like that, but all of these people have these fucking problems from this age, and we all fucking know it. But, like, what he did with the systematic, like, process of archaeology is invaluable. And a lot of stuff is that he passed that down to his students, a lot. And so students like Margaret Murray, like Amelia Edwards, although she's more of a contemporary of his, but a lot of students, a lot of the best archaeologists and Egyptologists come out of University College London because of Petrie. Howard Carter, he trained under Petrie as well. Obviously, he's got his problems too. We were talking about that earlier, but Howard Carter also trained under Petrie. And a lot of some of the great early Egyptologists who are really starting to care a little bit more and starting to actually care about like the process of archaeology. That's like the really big thing that is a life-changing thing at the end of the Victorian era, is actually starting to do things not proper, obviously, because they're inventing it in the moment, but more organized, more systematic, more record keeping, all of these things. Amelia Edwards, she does tentatively kind of fall into the Egyptology category. We've obviously already talked about her as a tourist and kind of being a fake archaeologist, but what really I credit her with is she goes to Egypt. She realizes that they need help, like preservation, and they need help systematically excavating, and so she does what she can to start the Egypt Exploration Society to help promote Egyptology to the general public. And to be honest, she keeps promoting it to the general public even after they freaking kick her out of the Egypt Exploration Society. Because she's a woman. So she keeps on doing it and promoting it, to, even though she is not helping run it, she still promotes the organization and teaches people, the general public, about preservation in Egypt. Victor Lorette, Gaston Maspero are a couple others in this category. I don't know as much about these men in particular, but they definitely were supporting more of the scientific study, learning about Egypt through excavation. Obviously, all these people have their problems that are very much based in their time. But when it comes to the archaeological method, which is really what needed to be fixed first. I hate to say it first, but they were kind of on there. I have talked about doing a lecture about the history of Egyptology. Honestly, I feel like it's probably better as a discussion, and we can just look through people and look through the field and how it's been influenced over time. There's so many people who have gone under the radar that never made the huge big discoveries, but were very supportive of the field and helped in a variety of ways. I have this stupid book on the shelf over here called Who's Who in Egyptology, and it's a very like it has essentially mini biographies of a ton of Egyptologists, and it also has little bibliographies of some of their writings. And there are so many people that are very rarely referenced and are very rarely talked about in the public eye, and I want to highlight. So that's what I'm hoping to do, like kind of with my my podcast and my Patreon exclusive podcast and stuff like that. So thank you guys for listening. What the fuck time is it? It's 11. 13-hour stream. I really hope you enjoyed this lecture on all the random things the Victorians did and didn't do during their Egyptomania. There's so many more. One thing I was very reassured of when doing this research is that a lot of the things you hear that the Victorians are doing, it's all things they did to mummies. And I'm reassured that some of the things that they did to mummies are unconfirmed, which is good. And I've heard people say on TikTok that, like, all of the Victorians ate mummies. That's why we don't have as many mummies today. And I don't know where the fuck they're getting that information, because we have so many mummies. So I'm glad a lot of this stuff is unconfirmed, and that we're really never going to know how many mummies kind of succumbed to all of these random mummy brown, mummy unwrapping parties, all of these things. So we're never gonna know, but I'm kind of leaning towards it's not actually that many. Firewood, yeah. Train fuel.